The final exam to become a pioneer was led by one of the strongest colorists, a man named Red. For him, it was a straightforward test, immersing each participant inside an orb of hot flames. The black lands outside the city are filled with extreme environments that humans can barely survive, so the exam reflected that reality. Within the first few seconds, some participants struggled to breathe. Then one of the orbs froze. It cracked open, revealing one of the Academy's top geniuses. I, on the other hand, just stood there, frozen. I had no idea what to do. I had spent all my color in previous matches, and if anyone found out I was colorless, I would be finished. Then I remembered one of my unique techniques, draining color from other sources. I pressed my hands against the closest burning orb, activated my ability, and in an instant, absorbed not just what was mine, but every flame across the entire premises. Every eye turned toward me. Not long before that moment, I had been deep in a cave, mining for a liquid substance known as ink, with my friend Nero by my side. I believed that if I brought it back, one of the pioneering corps would accept me. Walking out of the cave, I looked up at the shining city ahead, its lights cutting through the dark. Celebration was already underway. The city was welcoming returning colorists like heroes. 2 citizens nearby admired them, talking about how the team had successfully taken down another giant creature. As far as they were concerned, the shining city would always be safe, as long as those warriors were around. But the scene was different in the Shadow District. Outside a building, a line of people waited beneath a bulletin board announcing the entrance exam for the C-rank Pioneering Corps, open to anyone with color. That was where I stood, until I was hurled through the door and sent crashing onto the ground. 2 examiners stood above me. One of them shouted that this place was not for someone like me. I pushed myself up, frustrated, and held out the bottle of blue ink. I demanded to know what the problem was. The ink proved I was qualified. The examiner pointed down at me and laid out the truth without hesitation. I was rejected because I was colorless. He told me that in this world, a person's role is decided at birth, then mocked me for not knowing my place. The red-haired examiner unleashed a surge of red energy, cursing me as colorless. It washed over me, and I groaned, flinching from the force of it. Standing at the top of the stairs, he lectured me about what it meant to be a pioneer. With complete arrogance, he declared that only chosen people like himself, were capable of becoming one. He described the Blacklands as a place where the weak cannot survive, a landscape swallowed by darkness, crawling with dangerous beasts known as creatures. He spoke about pioneers like legends, people who risk their lives to explore, gather resources, and battle monsters for the sake of humanity. Heroes, he called them. Then he turned that cold stare back on me and said plainly that, for a colorless person, none of that was possible. He told me to know my place and keep to menial work. His final words were a warning: come back, and I would die. The door slammed shut. I stood there alone and looked down. Nero, my black cat, poked his head out and looked up at me. I reached down and stroked him gently. I told him we would just try somewhere else, that I was used to this kind of thing. Even then, I forced a smile. I made him a promise. I was going to become the greatest colorist who ever lived. I quickly tucked Nero back inside my jacket, not wanting anyone to see him. I made my way through the industrial streets, trying to figure out where to go next. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was still hoping to find a place that would take us in. I had no idea I was already being watched from above by a green-haired man. Later, I stood in the middle of a busy plaza with my notebook open in front of me. I crossed out another name, one more in a book already full of them. Every single location, rejected. I exhaled slowly, worn down and out of ideas. I made my way to Mari's workshop. She took one look at me and already knew. She said I must have been turned down again, going by the expression on my face. I told her she was right. Nero leaped over to her side the moment we walked in. She shook her head and said those people had no eye for talent, that I would outperform most pioneers if given the chance. I told her it didn't matter how well I did. They refused to take in a colorless person, no matter what. Mari said she found that hard to understand, considering I managed to come back from the Blacklands just fine. As far as she was concerned, my skills were already more than proven. I told her Nero deserved most of the credit for that, then asked if she would buy from me again. She agreed without hesitation, promising a fair price. She mentioned she had been running low on ink lately and it had become a real problem. I told her that was exactly why people kept talking about expanding the number of pioneers. Their entire way of life depended on that ink. I wish they would just take me already. I was ready to work. Then Mari asked if I had thought any more about what she had brought up before. I told her honestly that I still did not know what to make of it. The whole thing seemed strange to me. She slapped a piece of paper down on the table and told me I had to try everything available to me. I would never know the outcome until I tried, and this was a real opportunity. I picked it up and looked it over. The truth was, I had been putting it off because I had already convinced myself I would fail. I was not even sure my abilities would hold up there. Mari pushed back. She believed this was worth pursuing, and if the selection was truly merit-based, then they would recognize what I was capable of. She reminded me that becoming a pioneer was something I had been talking about since I was young, and that she and the others would back me no matter what. She was right. I was in no position to be selective. I decided I would apply to the Dawn Pioneer. Well, I thanked her and told her I would be back soon. I was walking through the streets, reading through the pamphlet, when Nero suddenly began to growl. I did not even have time to react. The same man who had been watching me from above was right behind me, and he came down with a powerful strike across my back. I hit the ground face first. One of them seemed surprised I was still breathing. Nero crawled up to my face and began to cry. In those last seconds before everything went dark, the only thing I hoped was that he would run and save himself. I came to somewhere completely unfamiliar. The man who had attacked me crouched nearby and remarked that I had rotten luck. I was still alive, which meant I would fall into that pit conscious. If I went in, there would be nothing left of me to bury. As far as he was concerned, it was the perfect place to get rid of a body. I steadied my breathing and demanded to know why they had come after me at all. He admitted he had not expected any of this either. But finding a creature intelligent enough to follow a human, right there in the Shadow District, was not something you came across twice. Then I saw Nero in the cage. Something ignited in me. I moved to fight back, but the man told me a Colorless had nothing to work with at that point. He said if they put Nero on the black market, they could retire. Something like that was wasted on someone like me. I cursed myself. I had been careless. I had let my guard down. My whole life had been built around contempt and discrimination, and I had learned to carry it. But this was different. This was Nero, my family. Rage tore through me. I warned the man not to push me and locked my grip around his arm. He stopped. Something shifted in his expression. Energy crackled around his face, and a swirling green aura began pulling from his body into my hands. He screamed, feeling something being forcibly drawn out of him. The sensation terrified him enough that he wrenched free and hurled me backward, straight into the vat of toxic ink waste. His voice faded above me as he brushed off the whole encounter. Nero's cries echoed from inside the cage. Below the surface, darkness closed in around me. I tried to move, tried to swim, but my body refused to respond. Memories surfaced without order or reason, and I found myself wondering if this was where my story ended. Then I saw him, a younger version of myself, holding Nero close. I was not done yet. Somewhere inside that void, a voice reached. It asked why I was doing nothing. I asked who was there. Then text tore across my vision. A single command, demanding I accept it. Thoughts crashed over me all at once, pushing me toward one thing. Save Nero. Accept my true color. Take back what was mine. I came up from the darkness. I stood at the surface of what had been there before, but the ink was gone. Something had changed. I looked down at my hands, black energy coiled around them, shadow and white eyes. I did not recognize what I had become, but I heard it, a soft, broken whimper cutting through the silence. I looked up. Two blurred figures stood far above, holding a small cage. Nero was inside, crying out. That sound brought me back completely. I reached upward with a hand made of darkness. A massive geyser of black energy erupted from the pit below. The green-haired man and his partner reeled backwards, screaming. They looked down and found the deadly pool of ink completely gone, replaced by a single dark figure standing at the bottom. The man trembled, eyes wide, struggling to form the words. As an enormous claw of shadow rose and came down over them, he managed only one question, his voice barely holding together, asking whether what stood before him was a creature. The Shadow District was unrecognizable. The explosion had left total devastation in every direction. In the aftermath, an old man was screaming at the authorities, insisting he had seen everything with his own eyes. A giant dark hand had shot out of nowhere and torn the entire area apart. Nobody was listening to him. Nearby, two investigators surveyed the victims. One had red hair, the other purple. The casualties, at least, were limited to the two men involved. Both B-rank pioneers, neither with particularly clean reputations. The purple-haired investigator still could not make sense of it. Something had drained every trace of color from their bodies, and she could not work out what. The red-haired investigator agreed it was worth looking into, but told her to set it aside for the moment. They were there because of the giant creature that had appeared inside the city. The officer in charge arrived and greeted them with obvious nerves, introducing himself and asking what would bring someone as occupied as them to the Shadow District. The red-haired investigator told him to relax. They were there on a creature investigation request, and he wanted to look over the incidents. He asked to be guided through it. The officer wasted no time pointing them in the right direction. They swept the area and found creature traces almost immediately, black ink scattered throughout. The purple-haired investigator noted they had been tracking locations of all recent large creature sightings, but a sudden appearance inside the city, even from the outskirts, was deeply unusual. The creatures that typically turned up within the city walls were harmless, small things, cats, rats, birds. If this was some kind of new mutation, she did not know what they would do. The red-haired investigator told her not to get ahead of herself. The more pressing question was how they were supposed to track something like this. He muttered that it had already become a headache he would rather not have, but there was no one else to handle it. I came to slowly. Something warm and rough moved across my face. Nero was licking my head. I grabbed him the moment my eyes opened, asking if he was all right. Relief hit me so hard it almost knocked the breath out of me again. But then the questions came flooding in. What had happened? It had to be connected to those men. I had fallen into the ink, and then something had shifted. The memory returned in pieces, and I looked down at my hands. I had color, actual color, in my hair. It had gone the deepest black I had ever seen on anyone. How was that even possible? Color did not just appear. It did not work that way. How had I gained it at all? I pushed the questions aside when I noticed how dark it was. I could barely see anything. I asked Nero to help, and he leaped into the air and released a beam of powerful light. What it revealed made my stomach drop. We were surrounded. Ink creatures, watching from every direction, had been there the entire time. In the landscape around us, I recognized a black forest, a place that only B-rank pioneers and above were ever supposed to reach. And the beasts were already closing in. I told Nero we needed to move, and we ran. Nero became my guide as we pushed through the forest, lighting the way and signaling danger before it reached me. A flash here, a shift in direction there. I followed every cue without question, but somewhere in the middle of all that running, I noticed something. My body felt extraordinary. I had been sprinting for what felt like ages, and I was not tired, not even close. I was moving faster than I ever had. I was overflowing with energy, like something inside me had been uncapped. Then an ink wolf came out of nowhere. I was still off balance and had no time to dodge. I threw my hand up as a reflex, bracing for the worst. The wolf's jaws clamped down on my hand. Its teeth snapped. It pulled back, confused. I stared at my hand, equally stunned. I had genuinely believed that was going to kill me. So this was what color actually felt like. Nero meowed sharply, cutting through my thoughts. Something much larger was coming. I looked up. Cyclops emerged from the dark. A far more dangerous presence. A top predator from the deep forest had no business being this far out. Before I could think on it any further, the Cyclops swung its fist down and sent me crashing into a tangle of roots. Nero bolted toward me immediately. I waved him off. I was fine, should have been terrified. But standing back up, all I felt was certainty. I had the color I had spent my entire life wanting. Things were different now. I did not have to run or hide or beg anyone for a chance. I reached back into that feeling, the surge that had broken loose before. And this time I drew it out slowly, with intention. The Cyclops charged, ready to reduce me to nothing. I pulled my fist back and drove it forward. The impact tore a hole clean through the creature and shook the entire forest around us. In the stillness that followed, I looked out at the trees and saw everything differently. The color of every leaf, the shimmer of the water, the vibrancy running through every living thing around me. Then it was gone. The color drained from my body as fast as it had come, and I hit the ground. I lay there, piecing it together. The more power I used, the faster it ran out. Then the voice returned. It asked why I was still standing there. My prey was right in front of me. The color I had always wanted was within reach. All I had to do was extend my hand and consume it. In that restless, depleted state, I did exactly that. I placed my hand on the Cyclops' remains, and the ink rushed into me all at once, force like a singularity, pulling everything inward, threatening to swallow the forest whole. When it was over, I exhaled slowly. That had been far too close. Back at Mari's workshop, the day had been quiet. She was bent over a blueprint when the door chime pulled her attention up. A cloaked figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted, radiating something dark and unsettling. Mari smiled anyway, keeping her voice steady, and asked if they had a special request. The figure said nothing. It took one heavy step forward. Her composure slipped. She told the stranger plainly that they looked suspicious, and when they kept moving toward her, she grabbed a large wrench and warned them she would use it. The figure rushed her. She screamed, squeezed her eyes shut, and braced herself. Nothing happened. The hood came down. Familiar face looked back at her, scratching the back of his head with a sheepish grin. I told her to relax. It was just me, though I admitted I barely recognized myself either. Mari's defensive stance collapsed. She stared at me, unable to find words for a moment before her voice broke through at full volume. She demanded to know what had happened to my face. Then the shock curdled into something else entirely, reached for a hammer in one hand and the wrench in the other, screaming about the people who had done this to me and exactly what she intended to do to their heads. I tried to get a word in, assuring her I was fine. It took some effort before she finally set the tools down, catching her breath. She admitted she had gotten carried away. She had lost contact with me and it had terrified her. Her expression settled into something quieter, and she told me she was glad I was safe. I apologized for making her worry. Privately, I was still trying to process the reality of it myself. I brought up the one thing that had been sitting at the back of my mind. My color was black. The color associated with monsters. I wondered aloud whether that would turn people against me. But I let the thought go almost as soon as I said it. What mattered was that I finally had my chance. I told her I was heading straight to the Dawn Pioneer Corps entrance exam and thanked her for everything. Then I asked with considerably less confidence whether I could borrow some clothes, promising to return them. Mari sighed and gave me a look, asking how many times I was going to show up begging. But the exasperation didn't last. She smiled, told me to think of it as an investment in a future colorist, then grabbed my hand and pulled me along behind her, announcing she had exactly the right things for me. A massive coliseum-like building loomed at the top of a broad staircase, and hundreds of aspiring pioneers were making their way up. Inside, the floor was divided into large white square platforms, and the space was already packed with participants preparing for the exam. The crowd was overwhelming. Around me, people were telling each other to stay sharp and not let the nerves take over, pointing out that the level of competition made it completely understandable to feel the pressure. Someone nearby marveled that the day had actually come. They were really standing here, about to take the Dawn Pioneer Corps exam. A red-haired examinee nearby ran through what everyone already knew. Getting into a top Pioneer Corps was the dream, and the Dawn Corps sat above all others. As an S-rank team, they had pushed further into the Blacklands than anyone else and had colorists across multiple disciplines. They were called the shining hope of the city for a reason, which also meant the names in this room were serious. The daughter of a distinguished traditional color family was here. So was a well-known bounty hunter, along with several rising pioneers who had already made names for themselves. Then someone pointed out Gale, the Storm Sword, practically guaranteed to pass by all accounts. Word was he had taken down creatures entirely on his own. He also had a temper that had gotten him thrown out of his previous corps, which was apparently why he was standing here now. The first examinee shrugged it off, saying that with proper training, even someone like Gale would not be untouchable. Gale, for his part, had been listening to all of it. He thought they were exactly what they sounded like, a crowd of people talking big with nothing behind it. He had expected more from an S-rank recruitment pool. Scanning the room, he found almost nobody worth his attention, with one exception, the young woman standing nearby. Ellie Cyan, second daughter of the Cyan family. The rumors about her color had not been exaggerated. He was curious to see what she would actually do when tested. Before anything else could develop, the announcement came. The Dawn Pioneer Corps entrance exam was beginning. The Corps colorists stepped forward, and the room stirred. People recognized them. They had reportedly played a significant role in bringing down the massive creature recently. The fact that the colorists themselves had shown up in person made it clear just how seriously the organization was taking this recruitment. For many in the crowd, it was their first time seeing a colorist at close range, and the weight of that presence was immediately felt. The yellow-haired colorist spoke first. He thanked everyone for applying and acknowledged that each person in the room had arrived with their own motivation: money, recognition, power, and told them plainly that none of that concerned him. What concerned him was ability. They were looking for people who could enter the Black Lands and take back territory for humanity. The yellow-haired colorist explained the format. Looking around the room, most had probably already guessed. The first test would run as a tournament. Combat ability was the single most important quality for any pioneer operating outside the city. It was survival of the fittest, pure and simple. The weak died. That was the law out there, and this stage was where they would prove they were not among them. Tournament results would determine who advanced past the first round. When a number was called, that person was to take the stage. Gale's number came up almost immediately. The crowd reacted. Seeing a name like his fight from the opening round was not something anyone had expected, and more than a few people quietly felt sorry for whoever was standing across from him. Gale himself was not complaining. He had been bored out of his mind, and at least now he had something to work with. The only question was how he wanted to draw it out. He stepped onto the stage and found a cloaked figure waiting for him. The stance was strange, the posture weak, the whole presence unremarkable. It did not matter. Nothing interesting had happened in a long time, and a stage like this was no place for restraint. He activated his storm sword. The crowd's reaction was immediate. The level of control he demonstrated at his age was something else entirely. The genius label was starting to make sense to everyone watching. He stomped the ground to build momentum and launched forward with a surge of speed, a whirlwind of energy wrapping around him, threatening to tear his opponent apart if they failed to meet it. The hooded figure did not move, did not flinch, did not say a word. As Gale came down from the air with his blade swinging, the figure stepped in. A single left hook connected with Gale's face. The force of it sent him flying across the entire arena. The candidates who had been talking the loudest screamed at what they were seeing. Gale hit the far wall with enough impact to spiderweb the stone, then slumped forward and did not get up. One hit. That was all it had taken. Figure reached up and rubbed his wrist. I looked down, acknowledging quietly that even I had not expected to move that fast. My hood had fallen back, and then the crowd's silence pulled my attention outward. A spectator was pointing at me, finger shaking, voice barely holding together. Black. The blonde examiner's expression had gone serious. Across the arena, even Ellie Cyan looked shaken, quietly asking herself whether it was genuinely possible for a human to carry that color. I stood in the middle of the stage, surrounded by silence I did not fully understand yet. I looked around at the stunned faces, confused by what I was seeing in them, and found myself wondering, with complete sincerity, whether I had done something wrong. The tournament pressed on and the battles that followed were fierce. My next opponent launched sharp stones from a distance, panic written across his face. I closed the gap before they could find me, stepped past the last one, and put him down with a single punch. The announcer called it. The streak continued. I slammed one opponent into the floor, knocked out another, and kept moving. From somewhere above the arena, the blonde examiner had apparently been watching closely. He declared me the standout candidate of the entire pool, and pressed the point. I was the first black holder ever recorded, and they needed to secure me before word started spreading beyond these walls. Heavy footsteps interrupted him. Voice drifted in, remarking that it looked like a demanding day. The blonde examiner turned to find the red-haired man and the blue-haired woman from the explosion site standing there. He asked what brought the team leader here. Red waved the question off, saying they were just passing through. They exchanged a few words about the creature investigation. Red admitted there had been no progress, then asked whether the recruitment pool had produced anyone worth noting. The examiner mentioned the young woman from the Tyan family, then began describing a particularly unusual candidate. Before he could finish, Red's attention had already shifted. Something had pulled it. His eyes found me in the arena below, and they settled on the black energy without any visible reaction. The blue-haired woman leaned toward her leader and asked quietly whether the boy was connected to their investigation. Red confirmed it was likely him. Privately, he had already reached his conclusion. A new color surfacing immediately after the Shadow District incident was not a coincidence. He would be watching me closely. I had no idea any of that was happening. I stood in the arena looking down at my clenched fist, dark energy still curling off it. The feeling of it was unlike anything I had known before. And for the first time, becoming a pioneer felt like something real, but I kept the other thought close too. I remembered what the transformation had cost my body, and I reminded myself to be careful. My attention shifted when a surge of ice cut across the arena. Ellie had taken down another opponent with a precision that drew murmurs from everyone watching. People around me talked about the Cyan family's color like it was something sacred. She stepped off the stage and walked past me, pausing for just a moment to look at me before moving on. I was not entirely sure what to make of that. The yellow-haired colorist stepped forward and announced that the first round was finished. He thanked the candidates for their effort and, given how far behind schedule they were running, said they would be moving directly to the next test. Those who had been eliminated were thanked and invited to try again the following year. A handful of them were already muttering about next year as they filtered out. Then Red cut in. He told the yellow-haired colorist to hold on. He would be running the next one himself. The remaining candidates stirred. Those who recognized him knew exactly what that meant. He was one of the city's top colorists, the most decorated pioneer in terms of territory reclaimed and creatures hunted in the Blacklands. The standing rumor was that when Red oversaw a test, nobody passed. The mood dropped noticeably. The yellow-haired colorist pulled him aside and questioned whether this was appropriate. Changing the structure of an official test mid-examination was not something done lightly. Red shrugged and said he got nagged on a daily basis regardless. A little more would not make a difference. He turned to face everyone and kept the explanation short. All they had to do was endure. Then he released his color outward and sealed every candidate inside a burning orb of fire. He told us he had recreated a fragment of an environment he had once survived himself. It would get hot. The Blacklands contained brutal conditions that humans could barely last a few moments in. Compared to those, what he had just created was as comfortable as a heated room. It was simple. Hold on. and we would pass. But if it proved too much, then it never stood a chance to begin with. The reaction was almost immediate. Most of the candidates reeled from the heat, struggling to process just how extreme the black lands must actually be. They clawed at the orbs with their own color, but barely left a mark. Enduring was the only real option available to them. The yellow-haired colorist watched, privately noting that Red had apparently been slacking on training recently. Yet the man had encased an entire room of candidates in individual barriers without a moment's hesitation. Whatever the rumors said, the skill had not dulled at all. That was what reaching the top actually looked like. Then Ellie broke through hers. She shattered the orb with her ice color and stepped out cleanly. Even against an ability that ran directly counter to her own, she had dismantled it with ease. The yellow-haired colorist acknowledged it quietly. That girl was genuinely gifted. Red glanced over at the black-haired candidate on the other side of the arena. Still inside, still holding on, but not breaking out. He reminded himself not to have expected too much on a first attempt. Inside the orb, I was in serious trouble. I had burned through far too much color in the previous fights, and every second I held on, more color bled out of me. If I went colorless in front of everyone here, the best I could hope for was being treated as a test subject. I could not let that happen. I thought back to how I had survived before deabsorption. The shield itself was made of color, concentrated and structured. If the principle held, it could work. I was not certain how far my absorption actually extended, but standing still was not an option. I pressed my hand against the inner surface of every shield in the room collapsed at once. All of that color spiraled directly into my hand and wrapped around me in a swirling current. Red's expression shifted from surprise into something that looked like genuine satisfaction. He remarked to himself that they had really found the remarkable one this time. The room went completely silent. I stood there, honestly frightened, taking in the faces around me. Across the arena, Ellie stood watching. This test had meant something real to her, a chance to demonstrate the power she had spent years building. The appearance of a color no one had ever seen before had pulled every eye away from her without effort. She felt the anxiety of it settle in before she could stop it. Her family had always told her she had to be the best. Falling behind anyone, especially in a moment like this, was something she refused to accept. She studied me from a distance, turning it over in her mind. Even at full strength, she was not certain she would win. There was something around me that went beyond raw power. It did not matter who I was. She told herself she would not come second again. Red walked over and looked at me with open curiosity. He said this had to be the power of black ink, noting that even the light it gave off was unlike anything else. He told me he was extremely curious and asked if I would be willing to speak privately. I asked about the test. He told me not to worry about it. I had passed. I stared at him. Passed. Had standing out actually worked in my favor for once? Was I finally a pioneer? Red turned to the yellow-haired colorist and told him he was leaving the rest in his hands. The yellow-haired colorist pointed out with visible exasperation that the test was not even finished yet, and that Red was simply going to do whatever he wanted again, wasn't he? Red promised to make it up to him. The yellow-haired colorist let it go, apologized to the remaining candidates for the interruption, and announced that the exam would continue for everyone except number 17, who had broken through independently and was already cleared. Ellie should have felt satisfied. Instead, her eyes followed Red and I as we walked away. We ended up somewhere I recognized immediately, the site of the ink waste disposal. Red looked around and told me it had been a rough scene. Not long ago, 2 pioneers had lost their color entirely here. Some witnesses claimed a giant creature had erupted from the ground at that exact spot, and right after that, I had appeared, the first black ink holder ever recorded, carrying the power to absorb color on top of it. Red said the timing was something else entirely. He had already pieced it together from the moment he saw me. There was no running from this man. He was considered a hero among colorists. Red caught my expression and raised a hand, telling me to relax. His actual responsibility was figuring out what had happened at this site. But what genuinely held his interest was my ability. Black ink, the power behind it. He said he had never seen anything like it. Color abilities followed consistent rules, and one of the most fundamental was that they could not be mixed. My power ignored that entirely. He also pointed out, based on what happened during the second test, that I could not fully control it yet. I could not argue with any of it. But then he said he wanted to run a proper test. He asked whether I did not want to understand what my power actually was, how it worked, what it could really do. He held out his hand and told me to try absorbing his ink directly. I refused immediately. The risk of something going wrong was too real. Red told me not to concern myself with what might happen to him. Black, he explained, carried significant meaning in this world. It was the color of the black lands, color of the black witch. It was a symbol of misfortune, something that consumed everything around it. A power like mine, left unchecked, had the potential to destabilize the entire foundation of the city, where creatures in the wild that had taken human form. If I turned out to be one of them, he would have no choice but to deal with it here. I looked at his outstretched hand, then I took it. I told him I would do it, but that whatever happened was on him. I opened the absorption, and his ink began flowing into me immediately, filling something deep and moving through my entire body like lava had replaced my blood. The temperature was unbearable from the inside. This was what a hero's color actually felt like. He observed aloud that the absorption was continuous, almost frantic, like something starving. He acknowledged that most elite colorists would likely be able to resist it, but for the vast majority of people, an ability like this would be devastating. He also noted there was more to it than what the tests had shown. He wanted to see how I actually used absorbed color once it was inside me. Then the red ink detonated outward from my body. My entire appearance shifted into something that looked far less human. Red's expression confirmed what he was already thinking. I had been the one behind the incident at this. There was a great deal he still needed to understand about me. But before anything else, before the situation moved beyond control, he would need to restrain me. Inside my head, the voice was surging. It told me this was extraordinary, that it needed more. The heat was perfect, that the strength was everything it had been waiting for. I told it to stand down. I pushed against it with everything I had, and by sheer will, I closed it off completely. Red stared at me in silence. I exhaled slowly. I had genuinely thought that was the end of me. I had lost control in front of a top colorist of all people. I needed to understand what this ability actually was before something like that happened again. Red looked at me for a moment, then said honestly that he found the whole thing exciting. He told me he was good. Red said that was enough for a test. Then he shifted his tone and laid out the reality of my situation plainly. He had been assigned to handle everything connected to the site since the incident occurred. That meant finding whoever was responsible, and right now, the most suspicious person available was standing directly in front of him. There was significant interest in this case from multiple directions. With my power and my color, even a rumor connecting me to the event would be enough to make me a prime suspect. The damages from what had happened on the city's outskirts were likely well into the millions. More pressing than the money, though, was what the city's authorities might do if they got hold of me before he did. Banishment was one possibility. Being handed over to researchers as a test subject was another. I let that settle in. There was no way out of this, was there? I was a victim in all of it, and yet here I was, cornered. He said that if I joined up with him, he might be able to help with my situation. I agreed before he finished the sentence. I was not going to pay a fine that size or spend my life in a laboratory. I told him I would do whatever it took. Red said that was exactly what he wanted to hear. We were moving in a reinforced vehicle that looked more like a ship than anything built for roads. I had never been this far out before. Gale, already seated inside, told me I was making him nervous and to sit down. I pulled myself away from the window and tried to settle into it. I was on a team now, with Gale and the others. Still did not feel entirely real. Before boarding, Red had briefed me separately. He had a spot picked out in an unexplored area and told me directly that he would need my specific abilities for what he had in mind. Seeing that I was not exactly calm about it, he told me I would not be going in alone and that there was no need to carry it like that. All the new recruits had been folded into the expedition. The Corps would be announcing the full plan shortly, and the details would come then. My only instruction was to be on time and show up at the designated location. When I had boarded, the others were already there waiting. Red's involvement had disrupted the exam process enough that, in the interest of fairness, everyone had been given another opportunity. Strong Group had cleared the additional test, and Ellie had requested placement on Red's team herself. He said under his breath that he could not believe he had been embarrassed by someone so completely unaware of what they were doing. 1 second, he had let his guard down for 1 second. He made it clear that when the expedition was over, the result would be different. The only reason he was not settling it right now was because Lavian was sitting directly behind him. Ellie told him to drop it. She said he would just end up on the floor again and was wasting everyone's time. As far as she was concerned, I was out of his league, and she was the one who would be challenging me first. He brought up the eye contact we had made before boarding, stating plainly that we had both agreed to it. I had not agreed to anything. I had simply looked at her. I kept that thought to myself and wondered quietly whether any of this was actually going to work out. We arrived at a Dawn Pioneer outpost. It was mechanized, structured, and operating with a precision I had not expected. Every time I had gone out to the Blacklands before, I had done it alone with whatever I could carry. I had no idea a setup like this even existed. Something poked my cheek. Turned around. Mari was standing there asking why I was spacing out. I was genuinely relieved to see her. She confirmed she had come, told me she had to be here for my first mission. Nero was with her too. I thanked Mari for looking after things while I was gone. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing. She also mentioned that joining a Dawn Corps expedition was an opportunity she was not about to pass up. Someone called assembly, telling everyone to gather as planned. They would be entering the Blacklands shortly. I passed Nero back to Mari and told her I had to go. She told me not to be reckless, then turned to Nero, who was already squirming, and told him not to be sad. Before she could finish the thought, Nero slipped out of her hands and disappeared directly into my shadow. Mari stared at the ground, caught completely off guard. She stood there for a moment, then told herself that since she could not exactly stop it now, it was probably fine. A woman with bright orange hair called everyone to attention. She told the group to prepare themselves. They were about to move into the Black Lands, and safety came before everything else regardless of the mission. Gout reports placed Area 21 as the destination, an extremely dangerous zone with confirmed sightings of unknown creatures and the recovered corpse of an A-rank beast. She told everyone to stay sharp. Before she could continue, someone came running and addressed her as Lady Aranzia, reporting that Chief Red had taken the new recruits and broken from their assigned formation without clearance. He asked if that was confirmed. It was. Exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of her head. It looked like bringing those rookies back in one piece was going to fall to her. As Red's team moved into the Blacklands, I noticed the main expedition group was heading in a completely different direction. I asked Red whether splitting off like this was actually fine. He told me our destination was simply different. I told him I did not love the idea, especially with all the rookies grouped together and moving without proper support. Red said it had not been his original intention to bring them along and watch over everyone, but with me present, nobody was going to get seriously hurt, and he suspected I already knew that. He told me to stop talking and start moving. We came out into a clearing thick with shadowy ink beasts and went straight to work. Ellie moved through them with her cyan ink, taking creatures down cleanly and efficiently. But the Blacklands were something else entirely compared to anything she had trained in. The environment pressed down on everything, suffocating, relentless, and the creatures kept coming from every direction without pause. This was nothing like controlled training. She reminded herself to manage her energy carefully. Burning through it recklessly out here would leave her with nothing. Then she looked over and watched me handle a beast with my bare hand. Her eyes went wide. She asked whether I did not use a spoit. I had not used one during the entrance exam either. I looked at her, genuinely confused by the question, and told her I just did not have one. They were expensive. I had figured I could manage without, and I had simply never used one. The two of them stared at me. A spoit was not optional equipment for a pioneer. It was fundamental. Taking down creatures required mixing color directly into the weapon. That was how it was done, let alone defeating them with your hands. Across the clearing, Gale had gone very still. He had gone up against someone who did not even own a spoit and had not managed to leave a single mark on him. Fire that had been simmering since the arena climbed several degrees. He told himself quietly and with complete conviction that one day he would put Kay down with his own hands. Red watched the two of them from a distance and smirked. Two genuine talents getting competitive with each other. That was not a bad thing at all. Things were going to get considerably more interesting from here. He told everyone to keep moving. They were close, and a short push would finish it. They cleared through another wave of ink monsters before Red called a brief halt. He reminded everyone that they had not even reached the main objective yet, so dropping their guard was not an option. Gale pulled out a vial and muttered about how much color he had burned through. I looked over and realized he was drinking personal ink, an alchemically refined substance that restored both color and energy. A pioneer's essential supply item, custom formulated to match each individual's unique color. It did not come cheap, and he was drinking it like water. I was not going to pretend I was not envious, so I reminded myself I did not technically need it. Ellie noticed me moving away from the group and asked where I was going. I crouched down near the creatures we had already taken down and absorbed them. That would bring me back to full. I told her I was fine, that I had done this plenty of times. She watched without saying anything, clearly working through it. Before either of them could push further, Red announced that the break was over. They had rested enough, time to move. We came to a black barrier unlike anything else in the forest. I asked what it was. Red said this was precisely why he had brought me specifically. He told me to watch, then fired a red blast directly into it. The energy dissolved on contact, absorbed completely, the barrier growing denser in response. He turned to me and pointed out that the absorption principle was similar to my own ability. Beyond the barrier was a path leading to ruins, and inside those ruins was their mission objective, Stella Fragments. I went still when I heard that. The others exchanged looks and asked what Stella Fragments even were. I said nothing. Red told them it was something the Shining City needed desperately, and that he would explain further once they were through. The barrier came first. I stepped up and placed my hand against it. It began pulling inward immediately, spiraling into me in a steady current. Red's expression broke into something genuine. The barrier was coming apart. My power was going to prove more useful than he had anticipated. Then the ground began to vibrate. The sound had carried further than it should have, and before we could finish, an entire wave of ink beasts converged on our position, drawn by the noise. Red said he had expected something like that. He told Gale and Ellie to sweep them while I held focus on the barrier. Gale drove into them, his wind-type ink tearing through the creatures in wide arcs. Ellie summoned glaciers that rose and impaled whatever came through the gaps. Red watched and quietly admitted he had been prepared to step in if necessary. There was no need. He had expected to be cleaning up after rookies. Instead, he had two people capable of handling themselves without instruction. He decided that was a pleasant development. I kept my hands on the barrier and kept pulling, but something was shifting underneath the surface of it. A pressure I had not felt at first was building in the opposite direction. If my focus slipped for even a moment, it was not going to simply resist me. It was a contest of force, and I was stronger. I bore down one final time and pulled the entire barrier into myself, splitting it apart and revealing the entrance to the ruins below. Less of a doorway and more of a bottomless pit, dropping into darkness. I called back to Red and told him it was done. He said his instincts had been right. He told the others the barrier was cleared and to pull back and regroup. There was no need to finish off every creature still standing. Then his expression changed entirely. A white light appeared in the sky without warning. Red moved before anyone could react, grabbing Ellie and Gale and pulling them clear as a strike came down and split the earth apart beneath where they had been standing. Gale stared at the ground. A pattern of deep cuts ran across the surface like something had been trying to reduce them all to pieces. Red assessed the figure now in front of us. He said quietly that things had been going too smoothly. There had been reports of a dangerous entity operating in this area, and of course it had chosen this exact moment to appear. This was not something to engage casually. The creature looked more human than anything else we had encountered, radiating something ancient and hostile. Red told us to move into the ruins immediately. We were to work together, locate the stela fragments, and trust that we were capable of it. I started to ask how we were supposed to manage that on our own, and he shoved me into the entrance before I could finish the sentence. I was still shouting as I fell, demanding to know what exactly we were supposed to do down here. Red's attention had already shifted completely to what stood in front of him. Whatever was about to happen between him and that entity, it was going to be something worth witnessing. I hit the ground and lay there for a moment. Every part of my body registered the landing. Red could have found a gentler way to do that. I pulled out the lamp he had given me and activated it. What it revealed stopped me completely. Buildings stretched out in every direction, entirely modern in design, buried deep beneath the blacklands like they had simply been forgotten. I could not process the fact that a place like this existed down here. The others landed nearby shortly after. Gale complained immediately about the darkness. Ellie told him to stop and pointed toward a faint glow in the distance. I told them both I was glad to see them. I had genuinely thought I was the only one who had come down this way. Ellie informed me that they had been wandering because of me, and Gale pointed out that she had turned the same corner 3 times before saying anything. The ruins were far larger than any of us had anticipated. Finding traces of an entire ancient civilization buried under the Blacklands was something none of us had imagined walking into. The stela fragments, that was what we were looking for. But in a space this vast, without any idea what they actually looked like, a blind search could take forever. I had to agree with that assessment. Walking around without direction was going to get us nowhere. In moments like that, I always wished I had Nero close. Something clamped onto my leg. I looked down. Nero was attached to my shin, looking up at me like nothing unusual had happened. I crouched down, caught between relief and confusion, and asked him what exactly he was doing here. Ellie leaned over and looked directly at him. She asked whether that was an ink creature. I ran through my options quickly. It had already been seen. Making excuses was pointless, but the more I thought about it, the less I wanted to hide it. I was a pioneer now, and I could not keep Nero a secret indefinitely while working in the field. This was actually an opportunity. If I could show them what Nero was capable of, they might be willing to let it go. I told the two of them to come over. I thought I had found a straightforward way to track down the stela fragments. After I explained, Gale tried to lay it out plainly. The small creature I had been looking after was going to lead us directly to what we were looking for. I confirmed it. While the two of them went back and forth about it, Ellie had already stopped listening to either of us. I told him it was time to show these two what he was actually capable of. He leaped out of Ellie's hands and transformed into a beam of white glowing light. Gale recoiled. Ellie looked quietly disappointed to see him go. We followed the light through the ruins. Gale admitted to himself as we moved that this was remarkable. A creature that not only followed a human willingly but carried a distinct ability of its own. He had never heard of anything like it. I focused on Nero ahead of us, sensing that he could feel it. Nero narrowed in, extending his senses, and found it. A fragment of white ink. He locked onto it and launched forward, and we ran after him. He led us into what appeared to be a bunker, We had already descended a significant distance underground, and it kept going deeper. Yael asked what I was waiting for, whether I was scared and wanted to stay behind. I told him no and kept moving. The space that opened up inside was large, resembling some kind of storage area. Though none of us could be certain, Nero shifted direction abruptly and came to a stop beside what looked like a door. Then a robotic figure dropped from above and landed in front of us with tremendous force. Yael stared at it and acknowledged that Nero had definitely found something. But what exactly was this? It looked nothing like any creature we had encountered. It began scanning us. It turned to Ellie first, identifying her precise hex color code instantly. It moved to Gale and did the same. When it reached me, it stopped. My hex number registered as 0. The color of the Black Witch had been detected. I was classified as a threat. Removal was initiated. Drove a punch directly at me. I got my arms up in time to absorb the impact, but the force behind it was immense. The others moved in from behind while I pushed back against it, driving my fist into its frame. It shifted slightly but held. Whatever this thing was built from was unlike anything I had encountered. Ellie struck with her color. Gale followed. Neither left a single mark. She pulled back and reassessed. If her abilities were having no effect whatsoever, this was not a standard creature. She spotted the ink concentrated in its core and decided that had to be the weak point. I came in from the side and landed a strike against its frame. It absorbed the hit completely and swung back at me. I had barely enough time to move. Regular attacks were doing nothing at all. Not mine, not theirs. I needed to think. Then I remembered. Coating myself in black had worked before. Wrapping my entire body in it would drain my color too fast, but concentrating it into my fist alone was manageable. A few seconds was all I needed. When the robot came at me again, I was ready. I released the strike and tore straight through it, leaving the core completely intact. The machine powered down and went still. I exhaled slowly. That thing had been far more irritating than it had any right to be. I noticed the core as it settled and looked it over. It was unlike anything I had seen before. Mari was going to be delighted if I brought it back to her. The other two were not finished with me yet. Ellie pointed out that she had assumed absorption was the extent of what I could do and told me to explain what had just happened properly. She intended to use it as a reference for when we eventually fought. Yale told me I should have led with that if I had it available all along. I asked them why they were complaining when neither of them had been the one getting hit. Before the conversation could go any further, the door Nero had stopped beside opened on its own. Beyond it was nothing, a pure black void. Nero emerged from wherever he'd been keeping himself and pointed directly at the opening, making it as clear as he could that something was in there. I stared into it and admitted I had no idea whether stepping through was safe. It reminded me of the barrier we had dealt with above ground. Something grabbed hold of all of us immediately. None of us had the footing or the time to resist. The void pulled us in. We came to in complete darkness. None of us could make out anything clearly except each other, and our bodies had been drained entirely of color. Every trace of it was gone, except from me. Inside the Eastern Administration office in the main city, a large round man drove his fist into the table. He demanded to know whether anyone had located him yet. Where had he gone? His secretary answered carefully. Word was he had gone out on an expedition with Red. The round man could not believe what he was hearing. Black ink. Red had taken something like that directly into the field. What exactly was he thinking? The man might be a celebrated hero, but this time he had gone too far. When the creature had appeared inside the city, they had worked to contain the information specifically to prevent public panic. What was he supposed to say to them? Anything he offered would be dismissed. Jamelia noted that someone was in a bad mood again and pointed out that he would end up hospitalized if he kept that up. Jamelia was the captain of the Dawn Pioneer Corps. He acknowledged his concern but told him not to get ahead of himself. Red was the one with the boy, and that alone was the most reliable assurance available. There was no one better suited for the situation. If Red had deliberately brought a high-risk individual along on this expedition, there was a good chance he was working towards something that nobody else had considered yet. What the moment called for was not fear or doubt, but confidence in their colorists. She lifted her coffee, took a sip, and immediately reached for a handful of sugar cubes and dropped them in. The director watched her and said nothing for a moment. He knew she was right. As long as Red was present, the worst outcomes were off the table. But she also understood why Black made him uneasy. That wariness did not come from nowhere. The Black Ink Witch. That was what sat at the root of it. Black had carried the weight of death and terror ever since the first black tide she unleashed on the world. The next one was not a question of whether, only when. The relentless push to reclaim and exploit territory was not ambition. It was survival, plain and simple. He had received reports about the surge of strange phenomena occurring around the city in recent weeks. And now someone carrying black ink? had appeared in the middle of all of it. Whether those two things were connected was still unknown. But one thing was not in question. Whatever was coming, they needed every capable asset they could secure. As Lord Luminous had said, nothing could be left unused, even black ink. He asked her to help him convince the council. The director exhaled. That was easier to say than to do. Those bureaucrats preferred the comfort of believing themselves safe over the work of actually becoming safe. He would do what he could. Back in the ruins, we tried to make sense of where we were. Gale pointed out that both his and Ellie's color had vanished completely. He asked why mine had not. I did not have a clear answer. My best guess was that black ink operated differently. Then both of them staggered. The strength drained out of them almost immediately, just from the effort of speaking. It occurred to me that this might have been their first time ever without color, that the absence of it alone was enough to physically break them down. Beyond that, something about this space had been pressing against my senses since we arrived. When I focused, I could feel something moving inside them. Then the whispers started. A flood of unintelligible sound with no clear source. Gale yanked out his weapon and demanded whoever was speaking to show themselves. I had heard something like this before, but this version felt different. Figure appeared beside us, the shape of a woman. Before any of us could react, her attention locked onto me, and my mind was pulled somewhere else entirely. I saw the city reduced to ruin by a force that moved like a vortex of living power. I saw a being formed entirely of black ink standing at the center of it, summoning creatures in numbers that could erase entire districts. And at the heart of all of it, I saw her, a black witch. I did not know whether I was seeing a memory or something that had not happened yet. Then, something else surfaced, a voice, someone giving me a name, K, and telling me to go and find my own light and my own color. The vision dissolved before I could hear anything more, and I came back to the ruins reeling, trying to process what I had just seen. Then I heard Gale. He was swinging his blade at something only he could see, voice cracking. Ellie was begging for it to stop. Both of their eyes were covered in dark ink. Whatever this space had shown me, it had turned on them differently, dragging each of them into something shaped specifically to break them. Nero appeared beside me, completely unbothered by the space around him, but something had caught his attention, and he was trying to communicate it urgently, pointing insistently in a specific direction. I understood. He had left a path, and he needed me to follow it. I would, but not before dealing with the other two first. I asked Nero whether he could use his ability here. He gathered himself and released his white aura outward in a wide circle. The effect was immediate. Gale and Ellie came back to themselves. I told them both to stay where they were while I went ahead to check what Nero had found. Followed the path he had marked and walked. The darkness did not change. The whisper came again. This time I could make out the words clearly. No color could ever stain him. Then a light appeared in the distance. I ran toward it and found what we had come for, the Stella fragment. Going by everything about it, this had to be it. But the glow and the shape were different from the fragment I had seen earlier. Each one was possibly unique in form. It did not matter right now. I needed to grab it and get out of this place. The moment I touched it, it lit up across every color imaginable, and my absorption activated without warning. It stopped almost as quickly as it started, and I told myself it was probably fine since it had only been an instant. I closed my hand around the fragment, and the black void surrounding us disappeared completely. I looked around at where we now stood and noted, without much ceremony, that this place was genuinely full of unknowns. I walked back over to the others and asked if they were doing better. Both of them stared at me. Ellie asked how I had moved through that darkness without being affected at all. I shrugged and told her that more importantly I had found what we were looking for. I held it up. Gale identified it as what Red had been describing, but remarked that it was incredibly small for something that significant. Ellie leaned in and said it was remarkable, asking what it actually was. Before anyone could answer, Nero's eyes fixed on the fragment and swallowed it whole. The silence that followed lasted about 1 second. I told Nero that was not food. Gale grabbed him immediately and told him to spit it out before he took matters into his own hands. The argument escalated quickly, until the entire building began to crack around us and the ceiling started coming down in pieces. I had no idea why it was collapsing and no time to find out. We ran. Aranzia and the expedition team swept the area until they found it, a clearing that told the whole story without anyone needing to explain it. The scale of what had happened here was clear the moment she saw the marks left behind. She understood immediately why the reports had flagged this as a dangerous entity. She had wondered what kind of creature would produce a result like this. The marks meant one thing. The battle-obsessed human-shaped creature had shown up again. The sword demon. She had been hoping the disturbance would turn out to be nothing more than a minor territorial conflict between creatures. Instead, it was one of the witch's black hands, a creature that sought out confrontation before anything else, she called it. The investigation was over. Everyone was withdrawing. Her assistant pushed back, pointing out that they were close to the original destination. The primary purpose of bringing probationary members out here had been to give them exposure to the Black Lands, and this had more than served that purpose. Then a burst of red ink detonated behind the group. An instant later, a series of razor-sharp strikes tore through the area from that direction. Aranzia told everyone to get down. One group was too exposed to move in time. She drove forward, brought her hammer up, and stopped the strike dead. She declared the expedition officially finished. Everyone was returning to base immediately. She would rendezvous with Chief Red. The rest were to head back now. She broke away from the group and found Red exactly where she expected, locked in a sustained exchange with the Sword Demon. The Sword Demon pulled out a spear and drove it toward Red with full force. Red deflected it and sent it spinning away, but the deflection left him open for a fraction of a second. The Sword Demon moved to exploit it. Red got his guard up in time and absorbed the follow-through, then answered with a sustained burst of red ink that pressed the Sword Demon back and bought distance. Aranzia arrived and assessed the exchange immediately. She called it a clean lure, then asked whether he could handle what came next. She swung her hammer and crushed the Sword Demon into the ground with the full weight of the blow. Red told her she had taken her time and that it had nearly gone sideways. She told him to stop dramatizing, had connected cleanly. The Sword Demon was still standing, though, absorbing that strike and remaining functional. Red said it was fine with both of them here. Something like this was manageable. Aranzia noted privately that it was fortunate she had arrived before Red committed fully, because no colorist, herself included, wanted to see what that actually looked like. Red did not argue the point. With her here, they had more than enough to separate another of the witch's black hands from the field. The Sword Demon processed his position clearly, then a voice rang out from behind him. I called back to the others that we were almost clear. Every eye on the battlefield shifted. The voices of Gale and Ellie followed, and the three of us emerged from the ruins into the open. I registered 2 figures ahead, one close, one further back. Red and Dronzer surged forward, trying to close the distance in time. Red screamed at us to fall back. The Sword Demon was already moving. He launched himself toward our group, and Gale and Ellie reacted immediately. But the Sword Demon released a single strike that scattered both of them before they could establish anything. He wound up for a wide, lethal follow-through. I stepped in front of the other two and took it. I had reinforced my arm with black ink. It went through anyway. I hit the ground. Before anyone could recover, Gale took a hit to the stomach and went down. Ellie was seized and pulled off her feet. The Sword Demon turned toward the colorists and gave his terms plainly. Clear a path. Do not pursue. He wanted the key, and if they failed to deliver it, the weaklings in his grip would not survive the next few seconds. Nero crouched beside me and cried. Everything had gone still.
The swordsman told them to decide quickly. Arantia and Red both felt something shift. Neither could hold back the unease rising in them, though neither could immediately place what the swordsman meant by it. Then they both looked toward where his attention had settled.
Then I got up. Whatever presence came off me in that moment reached the Sword Demon before I did. I watched his expression shift. My body had converted entirely to ink. The arm that had been cut through was slowly reconstructing itself in real space. The Sword Demon could not process what he was seeing. How had I stood back up? And why did a human carry black in the first place? I extended the newly formed hand and pulled. The force that came out of me was unlike anything I had produced before. The Sword Demon felt it before he could brace against it. A draw so powerful it offered no resistance to push back against. I closed my hand around his throat and lifted him off the ground. Arantia seized the moment and ordered Gale and Ellie to move. Red watched from his position without moving. He was trying to determine what had actually happened, whether I had been consumed by the black, or whether it had become one of the black hands. The Sword Demon felt it too. Something was pulling at his very existence, the same as the witch, and the eyes looking through him confirmed what his instincts had already concluded. It had been him the entire time. The key had been right in front of them. Erratic shapes began emerging from my hand, mouths pulling slowly toward his face, with the clear intention of consuming him entirely. He reached for his last blade and cut through them before they could close in. He recalculated immediately. Taking the key in this state was not viable. The logical move was to remove the limbs, arms, legs. They could always be replaced. He drove a flurry of his most lethal strikes directly into me. None of them went through. He stared at the blade in his hand. I reached out and closed my grip around it. Black ink spread outward from my hand across the ground beneath him. He jumped clear before it could swallow him, and even then, the reality of what he had just encountered unsettled something in him that did not unsettle easily. Aranzia read the opening and drove her hammer into his blade with everything she had. It shattered. He backpedaled, ran the numbers one final time, and accepted the outcome. This was too dangerous to press further. He had found the key. That information alone was worth more than forcing a result today. He turned and ran. Aranzia could not believe it. He had torn through the area without restraint, and the moment things shifted against him, he simply left. He told Red they had to cut him off before he reached the depths. Red was already moving. He asked the sword demon where exactly he thought he was going and poured his power into his blade, Chroma. Extinguishing Flame Strike, the cut took the sword demon's hand cleanly and bit into the ground before it. The wound would not recover. Chroma did not allow regeneration. Red pursued without pause. Driving strikes meant to end things permanently. He told himself that next time the outcome would be different. The key would be his, and he would earn her favor. Then he dropped into the shadows, descending far deeper than any of us could follow. Aranzia said they needed to keep after him. Red refused. Going deeper without proper preparation would be reckless regardless of what was at stake. She drove her foot into the ground in frustration. They had been close and lost him again. Red acknowledged it was difficult to accept, but the Black Lands themselves functioned as cover for the creatures that moved through them. Yael and Ellie came back. Ellie apologized for being a liability throughout the encounter. Red told her to let it go. The fact that everyone was standing was what mattered. Red coughed and shifted the conversation to the more immediate problem. He asked what exactly they were supposed to do with me now. He had known my power carried significant risk, but nothing he had seen had prepared him for this. He looked at what had gathered around me and tried to determine whether I was even present inside it. Then the black began to pull back. I did not return to an ink state. Instead, I collapsed into my colorless form and hit the ground, a faint glow coming off me as I lay there. Everyone stood and looked down at me without speaking for a moment. Every time they thought they had a sense of what I was, something new came out of it. Deep in the darkness below, the sword demon moved through the shadows alone. The chroma red had left on his severed limb continued burning through everything it touched, draining without pause until he finally purged it entirely and began to regenerate. Then another voice reached him through the dark. It noted that he had beaten her here, but that he looked terrible. Had someone worked him over again, it told him he really needed to stop pushing himself into situations he was not equipped to handle. He recognized the voice immediately. She wanted to know everything. There was no way someone had simply knocked him around without a story worth hearing. Viper looked at the burns and told him he had fought Red and somehow survived to be standing here. The sword demon told her to leave him alone. She declined. She acknowledged that Red was genuinely beyond most humans in terms of raw power. A man who burned himself up just to keep fighting was probably going to destroy himself eventually anyway. But that was beside the point. She asked again why he was not answering her. He had noticed it too, hadn't he? That the Black Witch's veil had opened. She knew he had seen it. What she wanted to know was whether he had figured out why. Sword Demon said nothing. He had no intention of sharing that information. Once the identity of the key became known to others, any advantage he held disappeared. He was going to claim it himself. Viper lost interest in pushing and drifted back toward her sister, remarking on the way that by working that hard to hide something, he was making it obvious there was something worth hiding. He was not particularly clever about it, but it did not matter. They were going to work it out regardless. She turned it over in her mind. Judging by how he had reacted, the veil opening was connected to something involving the city's people. She already had something in motion that would shift things considerably, something they had been developing for a while now. A little surprise, they made their way back to the city. Mari was there with the rest of them, and everyone's attention settled on me. Red spoke first. He said he had no excuse to offer. He had stated with confidence that nothing would go wrong, and he had not been able to keep that promise. He said it plainly. What had happened was his responsibility. It seemed that some things about him had not changed at all. Ellie said that, given the survival rates for rookie pioneers in genuine field conditions, the outcome they had walked away with was not a failure. Everyone had made it back alive, and that was due in no small part to both Chief. Mari stood nearby, trying to process all of it. She could not quite believe she was in the same room as the city's most recognized colorist. These people had introduced themselves as my teammates and appeared without any prior warning. What was less of a relief was that I still had not woken up. She could not manage all of this on her own. The nurse had said there was nothing medically wrong, which meant I could come around at any point. Red came over to her and told her again that there was no need to worry about my condition. He also had a question. They were looking for a small creature, Nero. Did she know where he was? Yael spotted him before anyone could answer. Pointed. Nero was emerging from my shadow, blinking slowly, visibly uncertain about the sudden attention directed at him. Yael informed Red that this was the creature responsible for swallowing the Stella fragment and forcing him to have what had been an extremely difficult station. He moved to grab Nero immediately. Nero read the intention, used Gale's head as a launch point, and landed cleanly in Mari's arms. She held him and said she had known he would be in my shadow. Red studied the creature for a moment and said something felt familiar about him. He considered whether he was imagining it. Then Nero opened his mouth and produced the Stella fragment, depositing it neatly in front of them. Ellie exhaled with visible relief and moved toward it. Red picked it up and held it. He said quietly that they had finally recovered another piece, and reflected that a great deal had been given up for something this small. The sound of that exchange pulled me back. The memory of the attack returned first. The impact, the fall, and I jolted upright the moment Red's hand closed around the fragment. I looked around, disoriented, trying to locate the thing that had come after us. Then a more immediate concern arrived. I looked down at myself. Colorless. I was colorless again. What could I possibly say to explain this? They turned me away the same way everyone else had. He told me plainly that he had no personal issue with my appearance. What mattered was that every one of them had performed beyond what he had expected on a first expedition. He told us to prepare ourselves because he intended to work us hard going forward. With that, he welcomed us all to Red's team. I stared at him for a moment, then smiled and lowered my head, telling him I would be in his care. Red said everything that needed covering had been covered and told us to dismiss ourselves. He had a meeting with Lord Luminous, then he was gone. Ellie spoke first. She acknowledged I probably had a great deal to explain, but said she would not push too hard. She asked whether I remembered anything from after I had lost consciousness. I thought about what Red had told me, to keep quiet about it for now, and told her honestly that I did not remember much from that period. She clearly knew I was holding something back, but let it go. More pressing, she said, was whether there was any way to restore my color. Mari told her not to worry about that. She had something prepared specifically for situations like this. She dug through her pack and produced a vial of black ink collected from a disposal site. I pulled the cork and told Mari she was the best. I had genuinely needed this. I threw it back without hesitation and felt my color return in full. Mari told me that was not going to be sufficient on its own, and that she had more back at the workshop. Yael had been quiet through all of it. When he finally spoke, he asked whether I was done with the conversation. He was leaving. Then, almost as an aside, he noted that his arm had fully regenerated and asked how that was even possible for me. Body regeneration at that level was an advanced ability that only high-level healing colors could produce. More than the regeneration, though, he wanted an answer to something else. Why had I stepped in front of them when the attack came down? I put a hand on the back of my neck and told him I had felt the danger and believed my power could absorb the impact. It had not worked the way I intended, and it had nearly made everything worse. He reached out, grabbed me by the collar, and told me not to play games with him. Nobody had asked for his help. He still could not stand me. Mari immediately stepped in and asked what he thought he was doing, coming at me like that out of nowhere. Yael held the grip for a moment longer, then released it and walked out without a word. Mari watched him go and said she did not appreciate the lack of apology. Ellie told her that was simply how he was. She said she would be heading out as well, and that she was postponing our match for now. Then she left. I told Mari we should get moving too, but that I had something to show her first. I reached into my bag and eventually found it, the core from the mechanical figure we had dealt with in the ruins. I had grabbed it on the way out because I had a feeling she would want it. Red moved through the luminous halls until he reached the throne room. Luminous told him she had been waiting. Red replied that the wait had not been without purpose. He finally had something worth reporting. After considerable time and effort, they had succeeded in opening the Black Witch's veil, just as she had predicted. Back at the workshop, Mari had the core open within minutes. She said she had seen references to something like this in books, but had never expected to encounter the real thing. This was without question a piece of ancient civilization technology, a device that used ink as its primary fuel source. The efficiency was what made it remarkable. Even degraded, faded ink had been enough to keep a ruined construct operational across an unknown span of time. She says she wished she could have lived in that era herself, a world built on technology and history that had since been buried and forgotten. I turned it over in my hands and considered the more practical end. If it was a genuine ancient relic, the resale value had to be considerable. Mari immediately rounded on me. Did I honestly think she was going to hand over something like this for money? She was a technician. She was going to take it apart and understand every piece of it. She told me to look forward to what came out of that process, because ideas were already arriving faster than she could organize them. She was going to build something specifically for me, and it was going to be exactly right. I watched her and decided that bringing it back had been the correct call regardless of anything else. I picked up Nero and told her I would be back later. She stopped me. She had just remembered. Someone had come looking for me. It had happened when she went deeper into the Shadow District to source ink for my recovery. A group she had never seen before approached her. Her first read was that they were unfamiliar thugs from another part of the district, but they knew exactly who she was and had been looking for us specifically. They told her they wanted to meet the black wielder everyone had been talking about. The moment she heard that, she knew nothing good would come from engaging further. She ran. I told her that had been a dangerous situation to walk into. I had told her to stay out of the deeper district zones. She knew that, but the circumstances had been urgent. She told me that if I came across anyone unfamiliar again, I should not engage. I thought about it as I left. The Shadow District itself was reasonably contained. If whoever these people were had a specific interest in me, they would come directly rather than approach through Mari. I walked and tried to let it go. Streets felt different on the way back. I was exhausted in a way that reminded me I had not actually been home in some time. Rest was overdue. But something else caught my attention as I moved through the district. There were far more drifters than usual. The kind of people who typically kept to the underground levels were surfacing. Something had shifted down there. A territory dispute, possibly. Nero suddenly tugged at my attention and pointed toward a nearby alley. I told him I was not interested. Going deeper into the Shadow District at this hour was not something I wanted to do without a reason. Nero persisted, growing more insistent by the second. I relented and started moving toward it. His instincts had never been wrong. I thought about the techniques I had been working through. My vision had shifted on its own a few times since the change, showing me things others could not see. I called the technique inverted sight. When it settled into place, I saw her immediately, a woman radiating color in a way that had no business existing in a Shadow District alley. Before I could say anything, she turned and walked away. I went after her without hesitation. If this was the person who had come looking for me through Mari, I could not afford to lose her here. I needed to catch up. I turned the corner and the district was gone. Whatever space I had stepped into bore no resemblance to anywhere I had just been. The entrance sealed behind me before I could react. Voice told me she found me very interesting, that she had not planned on revealing herself this soon, but that I had earned some credit. Not everyone could track her down the way I just had. I spun around, startled, and asked who she was. She told me it was a pleasure to finally meet a child of black. She said her name was Celestia. I stared at her. Her entire body radiated every color simultaneously. The only other person I had ever associated with something like that was... I stopped myself. Is the current Luminous? The absolute highest authority in the Shining City had come to find me personally. I could not work out why. Then the voice detonated inside my head. It wanted that light. It told me to consume every last trace of it and leave nothing behind. There was no negotiating with it. Celestia watched without alarm. She did not move to intervene immediately, and her expression carried more curiosity than concern. Red had described this to her, but seeing it directly was something else entirely. He was being consumed by the black completely, and yet he was still alive. He was not becoming one of the Black Hands either. That separation was significant. There was possibly some unknown connection between him and the Black Witch. Certain voices within the city's leadership had pushed for his elimination. She did not share that position. If he could hold against the consumption without being permanently taken, the value of his ability to this city was too substantial to discard. She raised her staff and drove it into the ground. Whatever had been pressing into my mind cleared instantly and completely. I grabbed the side of my face and steadied myself. That had been the loudest and clearest the voice had ever been. Celestini asked what kind of voice it was, whether it belonged to the Black Witch. I told her honestly that I did not know. She told me to relax. She had received a message from Red and it simply wanted to meet me herself. Before anything else, she wanted to offer thanks on behalf of the city. I told her I could not think of anything I had done that warranted that. She produced the Stella fragment. She explained that very few people understood what that fragment actually meant to the city, and that returning it was more than sufficient reason for gratitude. I said my teammates deserved the credit as much as I did. She agreed. It had been a collective effort, and she knew that. But what she was specifically acknowledging was something only I had done. I had opened the Black Witch's veil. Did I understand how significant that was? She told me that not one of the Luminous, herself included, had ever managed to open it. The only known entities capable of doing so were the Black Witch herself, and possibly the Black Hands. Stella fragments were distributed throughout the Black Lands, but the overwhelming majority were sealed inside the Black Witch's veil. The city had been fighting the Black Hands continuously over the fragments, and everything recovered so far had been limited to the small number of pieces that happened to sit outside the veil entirely. I told her I was following the explanation, but I still did not understand what the fragments were actually used for, why Red was investing this much attention in them. and why she had come personally. Celestia paused and said she had gotten ahead of herself. That part should have come first. She told me that rather than explaining it, showing me would be more effective. She also told me not to discuss any of this with anyone. Only a small number of people within the city had any knowledge of what she was about to share. The space around us shifted entirely. What appeared in its place looked like a city, whole, detailed, and unlike anything above ground. Celestia told me not to panic. She had simply brought us to where she resided. Celestia told me I was the first person she had brought here, which she considered a promising sign. She told me to watch closely. What came out of the darkness would be worth seeing. She raised the stela fragment and unleashed a whirlwind of color that descended like an orbital strike. I stood there wide-eyed as the black land physically retreated, pushed back by the force of it. The news broke across the city within hours. A new dawn had come. Luminous had pushed back the black land and reclaimed territory once again. People read the reports eagerly, finally understanding what the pillar of light from the previous day had been. The consensus was immediate. This changed everything. The city would be safer from creature incursions, and the newly opened land meant access to rare resources and ink that had previously been out of reach. New pioneer opportunities were already being discussed before the ink on the papers had dried. I overheard two people talking about families launching new pioneer ventures and the importance of investing early to secure a meaningful share of what was coming. I folded the paper and thought about it. One day, and the entire city was already moving differently. Given what I had witnessed, it was hard to argue with the reaction. After the demonstration, Celestia had returned to the ground and asked whether I had seen enough. She told me the stela fragments were capable of far more than I had likely imagined, and that what I had brought back was genuinely extraordinary. She also warned me directly. The Black Hands were pursuing the fragments actively. Once they understood what my power could do, I would become a target. She told me not to carry too much fear about it. The city had been holding their influence back for a long time, and if it came to it, they would extend that protection to me. She said she wished she could offer more, but the city was consuming people and resources at a rate that left very little margin. Everything she had was already committed to keeping the Black Land from advancing. She could not afford to be away long. Before she sent me back, she said something that stayed with me. I was special, and I needed to hold on to that awareness going forward, because many people would either fear what I carried or attempt to use it for their own purposes. She would do what she could to limit the worst of those situations, but I should continue working as a pioneer the way I already had been. That was enough. She said she had enjoyed the conversation and that Red's team would be properly compensated. I had taken a full day off without planning to, and now it felt like the right time to move. The question was where to start. Then I remembered Mari's situation. She had burned through nearly all her ink keeping things together. With actual free time available, going back out to mine made sense. It was what I had always done before any of this started. I made my way to the gathering hall. There had been a time when I could not even approach this building. The gathering hall was where pioneers of every rank came together, a space that had been completely closed to me as a colorless. Now I walked through the entrance as a member of Red's team. Every head in the room turned the moment I stepped inside. Rumors, assumptions, and casual contempt moved through the hall in waves, and I became the center of all of it without doing a single thing. Even the higher-ranked colorists seated on the upper level had stopped their conversations to look down at me. Apparently, a black wielder was enough of a novelty to interrupt whatever else they had going on. A purple-haired one looked down at the others with visible disinterest and told them to stop behaving like children and sit down. The red colorist up above wondered aloud whether she was genuinely not curious about what Red had selected. Aranzia said that his presence had been genuinely striking and difficult to ignore, but that the unknown variables surrounding him made him someone they would need to watch carefully going forward. That answer only made the red colorist more interested. There was nobody else in the world carrying black ink. At the front desk, the receptionist welcomed me and asked if it was my first time in the hall. I confirmed it and said I was looking for available work. She explained that since my official badge had not been issued yet, I would need to fill out the standard form. New pioneers without a badge were limited to low-risk assignments, ink mining, small creature extermination, that category of work. I took the form and started filling it out. Nearby, a cluster of low-level colorists watched me do it. The comments came without any effort to lower their voices. Disgusting. Not even human. One said I was nothing more than something ominous wearing a person's shape and could not understand why anyone was treating my presence as noteworthy. They looked to the man beside them for agreement, and he gave it freely. The black ink offended him on sight. He had disliked me from the moment he saw me during the expedition. and had not changed his position since. As far as he was concerned, I was a half-breed who had gotten lucky because a colorist happened to notice me, complete rookie with no real experience being paraded around like something worth taking seriously. He said that Brink veterans like himself should have been the ones receiving that kind of attention. He told the others that, since they were leaving anyway, and since their duty was to keep the city clean of contamination, they should go ahead and deal with me properly on the way out. Outside the city, I activated inverted sight and swept the terrain. The difference was immediate. Colored ores appeared in concentrations I had never located before, far more than any previous run. Mining yields had been declining recently. Fuel, weapons, refined ink, and the market value would be solid. Mari was going to be very pleased. Having eyes that could see through darkness and concealment made gathering resources a different exercise entirely. Limitation was real. It burned through color quickly, so sustained use was not viable. But it was considerably better than putting everything on Nero every time. I finished faster than expected. Going back immediately with this much would draw more attention than I wanted, so I decided to use the spare time for something I had been putting off. Ink drain was my most fundamental ability. Direct contact was required to activate it, and it had a tendency to run wild without my input when the conditions were wrong. I split a color stone and drained it completely in one pull. An expensive one, as it turned out. I noted the result and thought back through the patterns. The more vivid and saturated the color, the harder the ability was to keep contained. The problem always worsened when the whispering started. At least now I had a clear cause to work with. The next question was more interesting. The colors I absorbed, were they simply collapsing into black when they entered me, or did they retain something of their original nature? Each color carried its own properties. Black was theoretically the combination of all of them. If that held in practice, the same way Luminous wielded every color, then maybe I could learn to draw on specific absorbed colors separately, rather than letting everything blend into one. I tried to isolate Red's power from memory. The heat of it, the way it had moved through me like my entire body had become combustion. I focused on that specific quality and pushed outward. Small red stone formed in my hand. It lasted a fraction of a second before it broke apart. The result was predictable. I kept practicing until the sun dropped below the horizon. Walking back with the bag of stones over my shoulder, watching the last of the light fade, I wondered if I had pushed it a little further than I should have. I was almost back at the city when they came out of the shadows around me. The leader remarked that he kept running into the city's celebrities out here, said it was a pleasure to finally meet the runt of the group. One of the others complained that I had taken longer than expected, then added that I had a significant attitude problem for someone with no standing. I looked at them and asked who they were. One of them raised his palm and asked what exactly I intended to do with that information. Another one had already noticed the bags. He told his leader to look at what was inside, color ores, and a substantial amount of them. The leader said that was convenient. He called it good luck for a rookie, then said that hoarding a haul like that alone was asking for trouble. He told his people to make sure I did not get any ideas about resisting, and to teach me the appropriate lesson. They pulled out their weapons. I set the bags down on the ground in front of them. The blue-haired one remarked that I was being cooperative, smarter than I looked. I hit him in the face and put him down. I exhaled. Even among pioneers, people like this never changed. I told the rest of them to stop wasting time and come at me. I had somewhere to be. The red-haired one came in with his blade. I slipped under it and redirected the follow-through, putting him directly into his companion's face, hard enough to take both of them into the wall behind them. The yellow one came in with his fists. Just before the punch connected with my face, I caught it, reversed the leverage, swept his footing out from under him, and put him on the ground before knocking him out. I dusted myself off and caught my breath. Taking what belonged to someone else came with consequences. One left. I looked toward the leader. A bullet came at my head. I moved with barely enough time, and it tore a hole through the space where my skull had been a fraction of a second before. Only one thing produced a hole like that: a long-range spoit. The leader stared at me, visibly thrown by the fact that I had moved in time. He said it was a shame. That shot should have been sufficient. Then he started talking, said I had irritated him from the first moment he had seen me, that he had once wanted to get into an S-rank corps himself, that it was not a place that opened its doors to just anyone. He could not understand what was so special about a color that disgusting. He said he had come out here planning to break a few bones, but given the state of his people, he had changed his mind. He was going to kill me. Nobody was going to concern themselves with what happened outside the city walls. The barrage began. I moved through the shots, closing distance between us, and drove a punch toward him. He slipped it, and we exchanged blows directly. He told me to stop hovering around him like an insect, then released a wide-area attack at close range, something entirely different from the ranged bullets and considerably more dangerous. He told me what his color was as he fired. Crystallization, ruby and hematite. With his custom spoit, he could produce a wide variety of rounds in large quantities. As long as he did not burn through too much color and risk bleaching himself out, his ammunition was effectively limitless. He told me that compared to someone like me, he operated on an entirely different level. He had a genuinely frustrating point. His close combat alone put him at B rank minimum. Absorbing the bullets was an option, but coating myself in black had not blocked everything the last time I had tried it. One mistimed absorption and a shot like his would be fatal. Then the large yellow colorist I had put down earlier surged back up and lunged at me. I moved to dodge, but he got a hand around my leg and locked it. He called to his leader and told him to shoot. The leader told him he had done well and fired immediately. The bullet went straight through my head. I did not fall. I stood there and processed what had just happened. The absorption had worked. If it had not, the outcome would have been final. The leader stared at me, unable to make sense of it. He had watched the shot connect cleanly. He refused to accept that and fired again. I absorbed it. He fired again. I absorbed that too. I told him to keep going. Where was that power he had been so confident about? The bullets were spent. It was my turn. The leader's certainty started to crack, but he redirected it into doubt about me. He told himself I was bluffing, that even if I had managed to absorb the surface impact, my internal damage had to be catastrophic. The weapon was still in his hand, and as long as that was true, the fight was still his. The bullets were no longer a threat, but the ability I was using to absorb them burned to color at a rate that made reckless use unsustainable. I needed to remove the spoit from the equation entirely. That required getting close, which meant I needed range of my own. I summoned the energy into my palm and shaped it. A spear formed and solidified. I looked at it with genuine relief. It had worked. I had never fought with anything other than my fists before. The crystallization ability, the process of hardening one's own color into a physical form, I had picked up the mechanics of it while absorbing his shots. I told him he had shown me something genuinely useful, and that I owed him some credit for that. I threw the spear. He barely cleared it and fired back immediately. I took the shots and pushed forward, telling him that absorbing his rounds was not going to stop being an option just because he kept trying. I closed the distance and recreated his own short-range area attack at close quarters. He reacted with visible shock at the precision of it. Watching his own technique used back at him with that level of accuracy was not something he had prepared for. Then I shifted the shape. I pulled the black ink into a blade and brought it across his spoit in a single swing. The weapon hit the ground in pieces. He stood there staring at what remained of it. His spoit had shattered from one strike, delivered without a spoit of my own. He started asking questions he could not answer himself, whether something like that was even possible. He landed on the only conclusion that felt real to him, that I was something wrong. I let the power drop and caught my breath. The ability was expensive. Even that limited use had taken a significant amount out of me, but the destructive return on it was substantial. That was a ratio worth understanding better. I asked the leader what he wanted to do next. He had no weapon left, and if he wanted to come at me barehanded, I was not going to stop him. He told me not to get comfortable. He had not reached B rank by relying on a single tool. His color created ruby and hematite. He did not need a weapon to deliver them. However much he had to push himself, he was going to finish this with his own hands. He drove colored shards directly into me. I started blocking what I could and pulled black ink into a shield, using it to push through the barrage and close the remaining distance. When I reached him, I hit him hard in the side. He folded from the impact. I took hold of his color, brought him down to the ground, and put him there firmly enough that he spat blood on the way down. I told him I assumed that was the end of it. I was already behind on the day, and he had made me burn through energy I had not planned to spend. The leader lay there struggling to process what had happened. Pioneer who had just entered the field should not have been capable of any of this. Something about it did not add up. I told him to let it go. He called me a beast instead. He said I unsettled him. That carrying that ink from birth was not something that happened to a normal person, and that anyone paying attention could see it. He said I had probably felt it myself, that walking around presenting as human while carrying something like that was its own kind of deception, that I had never been human, that I was something wearing a person's shape and had never been anything else. Something ignited in me that I did not fully control. My eyes hollowed out entirely, and whatever the leader saw when he looked into them made him recoil backward before he could stop himself. Then I laughed. I asked him what he was going on about. He had arrived overflowing with confidence, and now he wanted to have a conversation about what I was. I told him I understood the feeling behind what he was saying, and that since he was so interested in my power, I would give him a proper look at it. He had gone after my belongings, so he was owed something in return. I began siphoning. Every last trace of color drained out of all of them and into me. I sat with the result and tried to work out my next move. Walking away had been my first instinct, but leaving them colorless in this condition was going to create a problem that came back to me eventually. Right now, the reaction to my ink was mostly curiosity, the novelty of something nobody had encountered before. But if it came out that I had drained people of their color, the narrative would be simple and permanent, a monster that stole color and left bodies behind. I could not let that happen. I searched through what they had on them and found their personal ink files. I worked through each of them, pouring the ink back in until the color began returning. It was slow, but it held. At the east gate, a guard spotted the group in their bleached state and assumed they had pushed too hard in the black lands and burned through their reserves. He called it into the hall and moved on. Watching the color return to them had confirmed the approach. It was enough to smooth over what had happened. If it somehow escalated beyond that, Red would likely be in a position to help manage it. Pushed open the door to Mari's workshop. She looked up from her workbench and said she was glad I was back. I had been gone for days. I apologized and told her I had picked up a request from the hall while I was out. She studied my face and asked if something good had happened. She could tell by the way I was looking. I told her she would see for herself. I opened the bag and showed her what was left over after finishing the job. The colored ores. I had thought of her the moment I found them, so I had brought them back. Mari grabbed me and launched off the ground, declaring that I was the best person she knew, and that she was going to put every last one of them to excellent use. Then I saw it again, a light moving through her. I had seen something similar around Gale. What I was feeling from Mari was different from that. It was warm. This was the color living inside her. Mari had always been someone who brightened the space around her, someone who had grown up seeing the same dark parts of the city I had and still found reasons to smile when there were none available. Someone who, when another person was stuck at the bottom of something, found a way to reach them. Color fit her exactly. Mari told me she could not just keep receiving things without giving something back. She told me to come inside. She had been planning to surprise me once it was finished, but she would just show me now. She also told me not to overreact. She had been building a custom spoit for me. She looked genuinely proud of herself as she said it. She had made significant progress working on it in the background, and with a foundation like this, she could upgrade the specifications however the situation called for. Before she could show me anything further, the door opened. A voice said she had heard I was back from the Blacklands and figured she would find me here. Ellie and Gale behind her. I asked what had brought them both here. Were they coming to challenge me again? Ellie said that was not it. She mentioned that Gale had been training relentlessly with exactly that intention, but the Corps had summoned us before anything came of it. Lord Luminous had personally acknowledged our contribution from the last mission, and we were being called to headquarters to receive the formal reward. Mari immediately pushed me toward the door. She told me I needed to go. The spoit could wait until I got back. She told me to come home safe, and that it would be finished by the time I returned. Lavian escorted the three of us inside the Dawn Pioneer Corps headquarters. I had never expected to set foot in a place like this. The interior was extraordinary, walls covered in records of past Corps achievements going back further than I could quickly read. I told myself I would look more carefully later. Right now, the important thing was ahead of us. We were shown into the leader's office. Jamilea greeted us warmly and introduced herself. I stared. The leader of the Dawn Corps was known as one of the rare multicolor holders in the entire city, someone I had only ever read about in passing references. She told us there was no need to be tense. We were here for a good reason. She said she had been genuinely surprised when Red submitted praise for a group of rookies whose mere existence had already put the city's leadership on edge, particularly me, the first black ink wielder in recent memory, if she could be forgiven for putting it that way. She'd wanted to meet us personally. She lifted her coffee, took a sip, and immediately pulled a face. She turned to Lavian and said she had specifically asked for something sweet to be added beforehand. Lavian exhaled slowly and told her to maintain some dignity. Amelia cleared her throat and moved on. She told us that introductions were finished and they should get to the point. 3 rewards had been prepared for the last mission. First, she placed an item in front of each of us. Personal Pioneer safes, issued from above. Mission pay and rewards would be recorded and stored there, accessible for withdrawal at any bank in the city. Gale and I both looked at what we were holding. I said quietly that with this, buying a house was probably within reach. Second, she produced our Seacrank Pioneer IDs. Issued early, she noted. Unusually so for rookies. We had demonstrated both the ability and the results, so the probationary period was being skipped entirely. Along with the rank came access to citywide Pioneer benefits beyond the hall alone. Third, the Color Workshop would be crafting custom spoits for each of us, built specifically to our individual specifications. Yale was visibly stunned. Ellie noted that most nobles could not even get an appointment with the Color Workshop. Jamelia laughed and said that the Dawn Corps was one of their most valued clients, and that our spoits were broken. which made the timing appropriate. The color workshop handled equipment for colorists at the highest level. We would find it easily once we reached the Luminina district. She said it was getting late, but she wanted to close the meeting properly. She welcomed us officially as members of the Corps and told us the organization would support us fully going forward. The Black Lands demanded strong fighters, and they needed people capable of meeting that demand. The fragment we had recovered was not a small thing. It was directly tied to the city's survival. She said she would be expecting a great deal from us as we grew into the role. Walking back toward Mari's workshop, I talked to Nero quietly. It felt like one of those rare days where everything had moved in the right direction. D-crank promotion faster than I had any right to expect. A custom spoit being built for me. Official standing in the Corps. I told him that becoming a pioneer had been the right call. I was already looking forward to seeing Mari's face when I told her everything that had happened. Then I noticed the door was open. I stepped inside. The workshop was completely torn apart. My chest dropped and my eyes went cold.
Outside, a full-scale conflict was erupting at the Shining City's eastern forward gate. A low-ranking colorist called out that creatures were breaking through and ordered everyone to concentrate fire on the larger ones first. Another colorist questioned aloud how long this was going to continue. Above it all, someone was watching. The Black Hand twins looked down at the chaos below. One of them said she would have been disappointed if the city could not hold even this much. It would have made the whole thing feel pointless. But this was still nowhere near sufficient. Tearing the Shining City down required something far more decisive than what was currently unfolding. A thought formed in her mind. She would need to go inside one more time. The swordsman told her she was going to get herself killed. She called him foolish and told him he did not understand. She revealed what she had discovered, that beneath the Shining City, there were passages connecting directly to the Black Lands. And somewhere along those passages, she had found something considerably useful. Back at Mari's workshop,
I called out for Mari. I moved through to the back room. She was not there. The conclusion was immediate. She had been taken. The question of who could do something like this pressed against everything else trying to surface in my mind. I told myself I was not going to let despair take over. Not again. Nero emerged from my shadow and landed on the workbench. I followed his attention and saw it. The custom spoit Mari had built for me. If Nero was pointing at it specifically, it was not just a spoit. I activated inverted sight and looked at it properly. The same light I had seen shining through Mari was there, trailing outward from it, leading somewhere beyond the workshop walls. I told myself to pull it together. The people behind this were almost certainly the same unknown group that had been looking for me through Mari Got, using her as leverage to draw me out. They had started this. They had gone after someone who had nothing to do with any of it. I told her to hold on just a little longer. I picked up the gauntlet Mari had made and put it on. It fit perfectly, and immediately I could feel the difference in how my ink moved through it. Extended fights were no longer going to drain me the way they had before. I let Nero take his place on my shoulder and walked out into the dark. I moved through the back alleys, past the beggars and the low-level gangs, staking out corners, following the trail until it led me to an underground entrance. There was another one nearby. That explained the sudden increase in people surfacing from below recently. A figure stepped into my path. The moment I saw the green hair, I placed him, the man from before, the one who had thrown me into the ink waste. He said it was fortunate they had waited and asked whether I had forgotten his face. We were not on good terms, he acknowledged, but there was unfinished business between us. He said he did not remember exactly what I had done to him that night, but he remembered what state I had left him in. He described what came after. Rebuilding from the absolute bottom of the organization, recovering scraps of his color through the most degrading work available. He told me that Lord Blank's instruction had been to bring me in, but that nobody had specified the condition I needed to be in upon arrival. I summoned a serrated blade and said nothing. I had no time to spend here, and people who kidnapped innocent civilians to use as leverage had already disqualified themselves from any consideration. I moved through them as they came at me, cutting left and right without hesitation. The green-haired man brought out a spoit and tried to press the attack. I broke through it and pinned him to the ground. The situation was considerably different from the last time we had been in this position, I told him. I was not particularly fond of hurting people as a general principle, but people who took someone like Mari had removed themselves from that consideration entirely. Some of the ones I had gone through would likely not walk again. They had arrived at that outcome themselves. They should count themselves fortunate to still be breathing. They called themselves pioneers. People who carried that name and did things like this were a disgrace to it. They did not deserve the blessing of the light. I drained his color, grabbed him by the collar, and told him he was going to guide me down. Then I dropped into the place I had never expected to see again, the Undercity. I pushed him forward and told him to move and keep his thoughts to himself. He muttered that I had made a mistake tangling with Zed, that I could not do anything without backup, that I had signed my own end by coming down here. I grabbed him by the throat and explained his position to him one more time. He was going to walk quietly in front of me without doing anything that required my attention. And if Mari had so much as a single scratch on her, he was going to have the worst experience of his life. He chose to stay quiet after that. I looked around as we walked. Nothing had changed, not even slightly. The Undercity existed like the shadow that forms directly beneath a lamp, the one place the light above never reaches. It had become a home for gangs and the desperate by default. This was where I had first met Mari. The man beside me seethed quietly. Did not matter. The man told me to go ahead and do whatever I wanted. His job had been to bring me to the base, and I had walked straight into it myself. As far as he was concerned, this place was going to be my grave. He was right about one thing. As soon as he stopped walking, figures emerged from every direction around us. One of them marked that they had been waiting so long they had nearly taken root. They all looked at me, and the reaction was visible the moment they registered the black ink. One of them said I looked like a raw lump of ore. The boss stepped forward, expressing satisfaction that I had finally arrived. The green-haired man dropped to his knees immediately and announced that he had delivered me exactly as ordered. The boss looked down at him and noted that he had lost his color again. He reminded him, without particular emotion, that a person without color was a useless thing. The man began to apologize. The boss cut him off. The opportunity had slipped. That meant his value ended here. I did not flinch. It was possible this was not the first time I had seen something like this. I looked at the boss and told him plainly that he had not changed at all. Then I asked where Mari was. The boss seemed almost amused that I still had not assessed the room correctly. He told me to think carefully about who held the advantage. If I had cooperated when the request had been made politely, everything would already be resolved. The more I resisted, the harder it became to locate Mari. He pointed out that the people around us were incompetent and useless in many ways, but that did not mean they served no purpose. He suggested I consider what might be happening to her at that very moment. My expression went flat. I told him fine. Then I would level the entire place until I found her myself. I launched upward and came down hard, and the ground shook from the impact outward in every direction. Someone ran to another boss and told him there was a problem. The black ink one they had been pursuing was tearing through the base, and he needed to come personally. The second boss told his people to stop standing around and go buy him time, but it was already obvious from the reports coming in that they were losing. Bodies were being left unconscious in every direction. Nobody could work out what kind of person could do this. The second boss arrived and asked what was happening. The first boss was visibly relieved to see the branch leader and said they could not manage to contain a single person. He acknowledged that the reputation of Zed rulers of the Undercity was in a poor state at the moment. I looked at the branch leader and read him immediately. This one was genuinely dangerous. The first boss made a point of announcing that their branch leader had reached A rank before leaving the Pioneer system. Whatever skill I thought I had, he asked, did I honestly believe I could compete with a seasoned warrior at that level? I should have listened while the offer was still on the table. The branch leader came at me with a single crushing fist. I moved out of the way and answered with a series of strikes. None of them registered on him visibly. He said it was not bad, but told me he wanted to see how I handled the return. He hit me with enough force to send me through a building wall. I came out of it without serious damage. He moved to follow up. I slipped the punch and released an ink wave blast directly into him, something that targeted the color inside rather than the surface. He felt it immediately, his color beginning to drain from the inside. He surged forward with a sudden release of power that forced me back several steps. He said he did not appreciate my methods. Color was offensive enough, and the techniques I paired with it made the combination worse. He acknowledged that there was likely more I had not shown yet, which meant he needed to stop holding back. He noted that controlling the full release of his power was more difficult than he remembered. Years had passed since he had last let it out properly. I looked at him without concealing what I felt. Pure contempt, nothing else. This approach was not going to be sufficient. I could feel it clearly. My standard fighting method had a ceiling that this opponent sat above. I needed to be sharper, hit harder, and work with weapons that would not break against whatever was reinforcing that frame of his. I released everything at once. The branch leader went still for a fraction of a second. He said afterward that it was the coldest, most murderous intent he had encountered in his entire life. I had activated the arsenal of malice. The assault began immediately. I drove the branch leader back with everything available to me. Spear first, then an axe that I brought down on him again and again without pause. I discarded the axe and summoned 2 blades, cutting through him in continuous rapid succession. He registered genuine shock. Each weapon I produced was short-lived, but every single one of them was precise and sharp beyond what he had prepared for. He told himself he was a Z executive, and he was not going to fall to a street-level fighter. He stopped caring about Blanc's instructions. He poured everything into his fist, hardened it into sharpened stone, and drove it forward at a speed I had no time to avoid. It went through several walls before it stopped. The branch leader looked down at me. I was completely unharmed. I had not simply blocked the strike. I had consumed it entirely. He stared and tried to recalculate. Creating weapons was not my only ability. He tried to count how many distinct powers he had encountered and lost track. He told himself that as long as he could use his color one more time, the outcome was still recoverable. Then, his vision cut in half. A piece of ink had attached itself to his face and seeped directly into his eye. Before he could respond to it, I was already inside his guard. The uppercut lifted him completely off the ground and put him down hard. He lay there and felt his strength disappearing in a way that the impact alone could not explain. He asked himself what had been done to him and arrived at the answer before I confirmed it. I asked him what difference it made, whether it was poison. Why would I feel any obligation toward him in the middle of a fight? He had nothing left to resist with now. I drained him. Then I turned to the gang leader who had been watching it all unfold from a distance, trembling where he stood, barely able to process what he had just seen his branch leader reduced to. My intentions were clear enough without words. Elsewhere, Mari opened her eyes in an empty, sparse room. A voice told her it was good to see her awake. He had been wondering how long it would take. She and that other person really were something remarkable. Who could have anticipated that a colorless would attract that level of attention and then manifest a color like that out of nowhere? He said it was apparently an extremely rare occurrence. What struck him more, though, was the change in the person himself. The one he had known before had never carried that kind of presence. Mari heard the voice and placed it immediately, said the name before she could stop herself. Blank. He told her he was pleased she still remembered. It had been a long time, had it not? Mari said she had thought he was dead. Blank laughed and said it had been close, genuinely close. He had believed at one point that he would be crushed alive when everything came apart, but luck had carried him through, and here he was. He found it remarkable that they had ended up crossing paths again this way. He said it brought back memories. He remembered all of them clearly. They had been special to him, his first test subjects. He had barely walked away from that day, but he had come a long way since. He now held a position as one of Zed's top executives, recognized by the boss himself. He told her to stop standing there and come inside. He would see exactly how far his research had progressed. He opened the door. A massive laboratory stretched out before her. Colorless people were confined and processed like livestock. Ink beasts were locked in cages along the walls. Mari stood at the threshold and felt something collapse inside her chest. She could not believe a place like this still existed. One of Blank's workers entered and announced that the new batch of extract had arrived. Blank said the timing was perfect and told them he wanted to see what they had brought. Mari turned to him and demanded to know why he was doing the same thing he had done before. Blank asked why he would not. Something this extraordinary was meant to be used. Leaving it untouched would be the greater crime. He told her to consider herself cordially welcome to his new extraction laboratory. The Undercity had descended into chaos. People scattered through the passages assuming it was another gang dispute. It was not. I was working my way through the place systematically, and eventually I reached a large open chamber. I asked the gang leader whether this was where they had taken Mari. He confirmed it. She was definitely inside. He asked whether he could go now. I drove him into the wall hard enough to end the conversation and summoned Nero, telling him to find her. Nero dropped down and moved ahead. A fresh group came rushing in from behind. I had no patience left for handling them one at a time. I recalled the branch leader's technique and reproduced it exactly. I drove through the entire group and through the walls beyond them in a single pass. Nobody stopped me. Mari told Blank he was out of his mind. She asked what was wrong with him. Why did he keep doing this? Blank seemed genuinely puzzled by her reaction. He told her there was no reason to be upset. He felt nothing but gratitude toward all of them. The test subjects from before had made his research possible. He told her to look at what was happening in front of her rather than listening to his explanation. A live extraction was in progress. Two of his men were forcing a colorless man toward a large basin. The man screamed that he did not want to go in. He gripped the door frame until his hands gave out and was shoved inside. The door sealed. The machine activated with a sound that had no business existing, and what poured out was a deep red, thick, almost like blood rendered in the color. Mari said nothing had changed. It was the exact same horror as before, Blank said this color was the most remarkable thing he had ever produced. His original experiments had been failures. He had not been able to isolate any color at all and had wasted everything he collected from her. But he had held on to something he had observed about people who develop color later in life. He had asked himself whether the potential itself could be extracted before it manifested. The answer had been yes, and it worked on creatures as well as people. Things he had written off as completely without value had produced color of extraordinary quality. He believed what he was extracting was something fundamental, identity, perhaps the very core of a living thing, and he could draw it out at will. His ability and his years of research had reached their final form, and this was the result. He was currently exploring the full range of applications. One discovery he had made recently was that creatures instinctively adverse to color could be partially controlled through it, though the control remained imperfect. Mari told him they were all insane, every single person in this room. How could they stand there calmly while a living person was forced into that machine? Did they genuinely believe the city would ignore this? Blank said he had expected that reaction, though he admitted honestly that he had never fully understood what the objection was. He supposed his thinking was simply too far ahead to be followed. Mari told him plainly that he was a murderer. She asked what soul and identity he was talking about. She told him if he loved extracting color so much, he should start with himself. She was certain his would come out filthy and soaked through with everything he had done. Blank's expression shifted briefly. Then he told her calmly that it would not because he had already checked. He had been extracting from his own body on a regular basis throughout his research. He would never develop something and decline to apply it to himself. That had never been his way. The moment it reached completion, he had put part of himself into it. He had stored it carefully. He said it might prove useful at some point. Mari told him to stop talking. Nobody had asked for any of that. Blank apologized and said he had gotten carried away. There was one more thing he wanted to mention. He had heard that I had come down to the Undercity. Bringing her here had been the right call, he told himself. I had always followed Mari like a shadow, even back then. All it had taken was taking her, and I had come on my own. There was no better bait available. By now, his men should have had me contained and be bringing me in. Even with black ink, holding off that many alone was not a reasonable proposition. He told his men to tape Mari somewhere else. They would reconvene when I arrived. In the meantime, he had preparations to make. He was going to be hosting a very special gathering shortly. The entire facility began to shake. Something tore through the ceiling and brought most of it down with the impact. Mari looked up through the dust and debris. It was me. Word reached the council chamber not long after. A report had come in through field agents. I had gone down to the Undercity and was currently engaged with said, moving through their branches one at a time to get Mari back. The counselor turned to Shamilia and asked what kind of situation she had allowed to develop. Shamilia explained that they had responded quickly. She had personally dispatched observers to monitor the situation from the moment it developed. She had not been idle. Beyond that, the counselor knew as well as anyone what the current resource picture looked like. Nearly every available combat unit had been redirected to the city's borders to manage the abnormal creature surge. Requesting support from other pioneer units was already a strain. They were stretching everything they had just to hold the line. The counselor asked where Red was. Shamilia told him that two of the Black Hands, the Collector and the Jester, had appeared at another fortress simultaneously, and Red had moved to intercept them. The counselor said those Black Hand movements were almost certainly connected to the abnormal phenomena pushing against the borders. Regardless, a peacekeeping force needed to go in and secure my safety immediately. An older colorist told him to slow down. Sending troops into the Undercity without careful consideration risked triggering every gang in the network for no guaranteed return. Many of those gang members were former pioneers. Their combined strength was not something to dismiss casually. He also said plainly that he did not trust me. He had been tolerating my presence and observing only because the council vote had gone against him. The fact that something this significant had already erupted around me suggested his instincts had not been entirely wrong. He raised the possibility of using the current situation as an opportunity to remove a dangerous element before it grew into something worse. Hudson said he understood the concern. His intention was still to proceed with the peacekeeping plan. I was the only person with the ability to draw back the veil of secrets surrounding the Black Witch and the fragments. That made me too critical to lose. Luminous herself had identified the potential, and he personally intended to bet on whatever future I was going to build. Then he said he had once respected Hudson, that watching someone rise to counselor on what most would call an ordinary color had been genuinely impressive. He had not anticipated that the same man would turn out to be this irrationally idealistic. Hudson apologized and said he would try to meet the high standard next time. Jamelia told the old man he was borrowing trouble. He also mentioned, for the counselor's peace of mind, that she had already taken a step to lighten the load. The other members of Red's team had been dispatched alongside the peacekeeping force fighters who had already proven themselves in the first expedition. That should reduce the margin for things going wrong. The counselor exhaled and told everyone to move out. Blank stood in what remained of his facility ceiling. He could not work out how I had gotten through every single one of his people and made it here. This was bad. Mari was nowhere I could clearly see, only her outline through the chaos. I needed to move through everyone in this room before they had any chance to pull back and regroup. I unleashed the arsenal of malice and drove knives in every direction, cornering them and shattering the large vials stored throughout the lab in the process. Then I crossed the room and took out the 2 guards, pulling Mariah away before either of them could react. I told her I was sorry for taking so long and asked if she had waited much. Nero jumped into her arms before I finished the sentence. Mari told me there was nothing to apologize for and that she should be thanking me. Around us, the colorless captives saw their opening and ran, scattering through whatever exit they could find. Blank watched them go and said it was a shame. He had so many things left to test, but new material was always findable. More importantly, he said, he was genuinely thrilled to see me again. When he had heard I had awakened a color, and not only awakened it, but survived with it, the excitement had been difficult to contain. He could hardly wait to observe how brightly I would shine. I looked at him and asked Mari who he was. Something about him felt familiar. She told me it was Blanc, the one who had drained them both before, the one responsible for all of it. So he had survived the collapse. Blanc acknowledged that I was being somewhat rude given that he was standing right there. He let it pass. Since they both wanted something, he suggested they move directly to the experiment. He threw 2 vials of color onto the ground. I asked what they were. Mari told me to be careful. Those compounds drew monsters in. Blanc confirmed it cheerfully. He preferred not to get his own hands dirty. The creatures might not be enough to kill me, but they could grind me down, which served the same purpose. He opened the gate. I moved immediately and started cutting through them. There were a considerable number. Blanc crouched and picked up a discarded ink dagger from the floor, remarking that throwing away such valuable test subjects was wasteful. He noted that color power degraded over time under normal circumstances, but with his ability handling it, the outcome would be different. He activated extraction and pulled the black ink from the blade into himself. He held it and studied it, genuinely pleased. He wanted to understand how this darkness behaved differently from every other color. Even this small amount gave him enough to work with. Mari watched me fight and felt the situation shifting in the wrong direction. Under normal circumstances, I would have already cleared something like this, but I had burned through most of my reserves just getting here, and it was showing. If I could absorb pigment from the fallen creatures, I would recover. She needed to find a way to make that happen. She spotted the mixed ink pooling across the floor where the vials had shattered. Then she noticed something else, a generator nearby. She opened it, worked through the components quickly, reconnected the power coupling, and picked up the 2 output prongs. She called out to me and told me not to touch the floor. Then she drove both prongs into the ground. The current tore through the pooled ink, and the entire army of beasts went down at once. Blanc looked at his fallen creatures with mild disappointment and said his masterpieces had been wasted. I pressed my hand to the floor immediately and pulled, drawing the power of every fallen beast into myself and refilling what I had spent. The recovery was immediate and complete. Blanc watched with undisguised fascination. So, this was what black actually was. Seeing it operate at close range made it even more extraordinary. Even creatures were simply fuel to me now. He wanted my arm, a finger even, a single fragment of the color itself. He wanted me to share it with him. I drove in and asked if he was finished talking. Blanc caught my strike with his robotic arm without stepping back and said it was a shame. This was why he had come prepared. He produced 2 more vials and loaded them into his gauntlet, drawing on the respective colors they carried. He told me, even as we exchanged strikes, that we had more in common than I was willing to accept. The way he craved other people's colors, the way he reached for them and claimed them was identical to what I did. He told me to stop pretending otherwise. He unleashed a green strike that I deflected, and we kept moving, trading blows until the force of his attacks began shaking the surrounding structure. He told me to listen. Even in the middle of this, he wanted to propose something. What if we worked together? He was certain that if I was on his side, I would eventually come to genuinely appreciate what his research was building toward. Did I not want to understand color at its most complete? The very essence of it. His extraction and my absorption combined could reach something neither of us could approach alone. Unlike me, he could engage with color in its most raw and original state. He rushed in and told me to give him my power. The strike landed. I planted my feet and absorbed the force of it entirely, then turned it into leverage and drove a punch back into him that put him through the wall. He slid down at coughing blood. He said quietly that he had not anticipated that. The effortlessness of the mid-fight absorption was something he had not accounted for, And despite how similar their abilities were, the gap between them was enormous. In that case, he said, he would have to bring out the last thing he had saved. He reached for the black vial he had extracted from the dagger and loaded it into his arm. I asked what exactly he thought he was trying, whether he had grown tired of living. Blanc said not at all. He was collecting data, nothing more. Besides, this particular color had effectively been made from me to begin with. Possibility that it might kill him only made the experiment more compelling. The black ink spread through his body. It held. Even a fragment of the color carried this much. His fist had transformed entirely into black ink, and his right eye had followed. He said it was magnificent. He told me I had better be paying attention because his appetite for the fight was growing considerably. We clashed again, fist against fist. Blanc said the moment he had touched it, everything had become perfectly clear. This was what my color actually felt like from the inside. He pressed the offer one more time. Was I genuinely certain I did not want to work with him? A meeting like this did not happen by coincidence. I told him to stop. I was nothing like him. Blanc laughed and said that was interesting, because the evidence suggested otherwise. He told me I had never really had an identity of my own to begin with, that I had always moved through the world absorbing other people's colors, feeding off what others carried. He said he could see straight through it. That emptiness was my true self. He was not criticizing. He made clear he actually found it admirable in its honesty. All this time, seeing color in everyone around me, I had done nothing but envy it and crave it and want to make it mine. That was where my current form had come from. In the end, I was also just pursuing my own wants. The difference between us, he suggested, was that he did not lie to himself about it. He genuinely could not understand why I worked so hard at performing humanity. Then a wrench hit Blanc square in the head. Mari told him to stop talking. She asked who exactly he thought he was, walking in here and speaking as though he understood everything about me. At most, she said, he had barely glimpsed me when I was a child. Mari asked whether Blanc thought I was anything like him. How dare he compare trash like him to someone who treated human life as nothing more than disposable material? I was not copying anyone. The reason I pushed as hard as I did was because I wanted to change, become something better than what I had started as. She said he could not begin to imagine what I had gone through. I might be different from other people in certain ways, but that did not make me any less human. She told him not to look down on me. He was a psychopath and a piece of filth, and he had no standing to speak about anyone else. Then I released a burst of power. Blanc registered genuine surprise. He had not known it could go further than what he had already seen. I drove forward with everything I had and came down on his fist. His body could not sustain the black ink any longer, and the window that created was all I needed. I came in with a final strike that cracked the floor outward in every direction and ended the fight. Mari came to me immediately and asked whether I was hurt. I told her I was fine. She looked at Blanc on the ground and said she did not think he was getting back up. I agreed. He was barely holding on. This was where it ended between us. I could not leave things unresolved. If I walked away now, he would rebuild and start again somewhere else. Blanc coughed up color and smiled through it. He said the rushed power had not been enough to finish him after all. A genuine shame. He wondered what he might have accomplished with just a little more of my color to work with. He had not given up yet. If obtaining my color was the goal, there was no limit to what he was willing to do to get there. Facility began detonating around us. Blanc explained that volatile coloring charges had been planted throughout the structure. Contact with the organization had been lost and enough damage had been done down here. When that happened, those above flipped the switch and erased everything. If it was going to end anyway, he might as well try one last thing. The floor gave way. Both Mari and I dropped into a pit of ink below. I tried to process what I was looking at. Ink this far underground accumulated in this volume. It had to be the runoff from every extraction room, leaked and collected here over time. If that was true, Mari was in serious danger. The colorless were the most vulnerable to black ink of anyone. I looked and found her already sinking, barely keeping herself at the surface. I had to absorb everything in here immediately, but the volume was too large. It would take far too long to clear it completely, and she would be gone before I finished unless I could reach her directly. I pushed through it toward her. The thought arrived that I might already be too late. I had always known that when someone fell into black ink, there was no coming back. Why had I been given this color in the first place? Had it not been for that light? For the beauty of it? For everything it represented? Something inside me asked whether I was truly willing to give that up now. The answer was immediate and absolute. I was not. I kept moving. Once had been more than enough to lose someone in a place like this. I was not going to let it happen again. Not ever. I reached into the ink and found her hand and grabbed it, and I began pulling everything around her into myself. She had promised to be there when I became a colorist. She had told me that everyone carried their own light and color inside them, and that I was no different, that I simply had not found mine yet. Those words were the same ones Lumiel had spoken. That was why they had stayed with me after we came out of the Undercity all those years ago. There had been discrimination and persecution along the way. That was real. But most of the people we had encountered were lighting up the space around them with something distinctly their own. Leaving the Undercity with her that day, I had understood something I could not have arrived at alone. If I had stayed by myself, I would have remained buried in that emptiness indefinitely, never once touching happiness or anything close to it. But I had come to understand a little. If Lumiel had shown me the path, then Mari had given me a reason to keep walking it, a reason to smile. So she needed to wake up. We had made a promise. The ink was mostly gone. Mari was not breathing. I could not understand it. I had pulled out all of the black. Then I saw it. The same light I had glimpsed in her before, beginning to glow from somewhere inside her. The inner potential they had spoken about. If I could draw that light out, there was still a chance. I took her hand and told myself to do exactly what I had always done. The same thing I had been doing from the beginning. The light expanded outward and wrapped around me completely. It felt nothing like my standard absorption. It felt familiar, warm in a way I did not have words for. This was her inner world, her joy, her happiness, everything she had always carried without making a point of it. Of course, it shone like this. Bright and vivid and completely her. Mari came back. She jolted upright, coughing hard, trying to orient herself. She said she was certain she had gone under, certain the black ink had taken her. Then she looked down at herself and went completely still. She had color. She looked up at me wide-eyed and started to panic. I told her to stay calm and asked how her body felt. I told her I knew it was a lot to take in, but we needed to get out before we could work through any of it. Even with the explosions blocking the upper exits, there had to be another way out, somewhere below. The ceiling blew open above us and he dropped through, landing cleanly. Behind him came Gale and Ellie, who took in the scene and said they were glad to find us. I could not pinpoint exactly when my memories had actually begun. In those earliest days, my mind felt like it was wrapped in fog. Even the boundary between myself and the world around me was faint, barely there. I had simply drifted, carried along by something vast with no direction attached to it. Every so often the fog would thin, my vision would sharpen, and I would find myself somewhere I had never been before. That it never bothered me much. Wherever the drifting took me, I was not entirely alone. Nero was there. When I had nothing else, he was the one constant that stayed. Then one day, in the middle of that pitch-black world, someone appeared who shone with a brilliance I had no frame of reference for. He told me his name was Lumiel. The moment I saw him, I understood something I could not have explained. He was the light I had been searching for without knowing I was searching. But the time with him did not last. After we parted, I drifted again, moving through strange and unfamiliar places, carrying the image of that light in my chest and looking for it everywhere I went. Like a moth pulled toward a source of light, I wondered whether I would ever stand before that brilliance again. The wandering eventually brought me to the very bottom of the Undercity. That was where I found Mari. She looked at me and asked why I was not saying anything, whether I was mute or perhaps deaf. She noted that there were plenty of children like that in the Undercity. But regardless, she told me not to let the water touch me. The old pipe in the ceiling had burst and there was ink residue mixed into the leak. It was bad for my health. She wondered how I had gotten in, then noticed Nero, and asked why I was walking around with a creature. She decided it was probably fine given his size. She led me toward a more secluded area before the guards could notice us. The guards came anyway. They were angry. She had left the designated area without permission, and one of them asked whether she needed another beating to remind her of the boundaries. They turned their attention to me next. They said they had not seen me before and asked whether I was a new test subject. They noted that the timing was convenient since they had been looking for additional material. They dragged us both back to Blanc. Blanc was not in a good mood. He said precious samples wandering around freely was a management failure and asked what kind of operation was being run. The guards apologized. He turned to Mari and told her he was glad to see her, but that she genuinely did not know when to stop. Even valuable samples had a limit to how much tolerance they could expect. If she kept pushing, the only person who would suffer for it was her. I understood quickly what the place actually was. On the surface, it presented as an ordinary orphanage, but it operated as a detention facility, one of the false establishments hidden in the Undercity that exploited the city's poverty relief policies for its own purposes. Back alley children were everywhere down there, and using them as cheap labor was considered unremarkable by those who ran things underground. But labor was not the true purpose of this. It was experimentation. Security was tight, and the only way out for most was in a body bag. Mari had never intended to die there. Long before I arrived, she had already been working on escape, organizing the other children, failing, refusing to stop, and trying again. Every failed attempt produced the same result from her. She kept going. She became the foundation that the others leaned on. 3 days before the patrol rotation would open a gap in security large enough to move through, she thanked me and told me we were getting out together. I think that was around the time I began to actually fall into step with her. She gathered the other children quietly and told them to keep it between themselves. That night was the last night any of them would spend in that place. Once they were clear, she said she was going to Shining City to learn a trade and run her own workshop. Even the colorless could find work there until they earned citizenship. They would have to stay near the outer walls to start, but that was infinitely better than where they were. She asked me what I wanted to do once we got out. I said one word: colorist. The person I had met before had been a colorist. That was enough reason for me to want to try. It was the first time I had expressed something resembling my own will, but I also understood, somewhere underneath it, that it was impossible. I had heard it repeated so many times, how powerless the colorless were. I had followed the light I had seen and ended up here, and that was the full extent of it. While everyone around me buzzed with excitement about leaving tomorrow, I could not locate the feeling they were describing. I was simply different from all of them. Mari smiled and asked whether I knew that colorless people could manifest color later in life. Lumiel, the previous Lumiès, had been colorless, and yet he had shone more brilliantly than anyone who had come before or after him. That was why she believed every person carried their own light and color on the inside. I was no different. It was not that I could not feel it. I simply did not know it was there yet. She said she would help me find it, one step at a time. A colorist sounded like something worth pursuing. I had not even started yet. Giving up before the first attempt would be something I would carry regret over for the rest of my life. The act of trying already meant something. Failing did not mean it was finished. I should do what I wanted and keep my head up. Looking the way I did all the time was never going to help me find the motivation to move forward. That night was full of something that felt like hope. The brutal reality did not care. The escape was dismantled almost immediately. Children were caught and run through extractions with the efficiency that made the struggle feel meaningless. The resistance was treated as nothing more than noise against an inevitable outcome. One of the guards, watching Mari refuse to stop fighting, struck her across the head with a pipe to keep her still. Even bleeding, even barely upright, she turned and told me to run. Something ignited in me at that moment. I recognized it clearly. Anger. Then something struck me across the head as well, and everything went dark. Nearby, 2 guards argued about whether they were even permitted to dispose of the children without Blanc's authorization. The other said it did not matter. Orders had come from above, and that was sufficient. He had heard the lab's existence had nearly been exposed. They kept bickering about the work while I slowly got back up. What happened after that was what had caused the collapse. I did not fully understand what I had done. I came back to myself with Mari and Nero crouched over me. I asked what had happened. Mari said she did not know. She had woken up the same way I had. There had been some kind of massive explosion, or something resembling one. When she came to, everything was already destroyed. Nobody else had made it out. She sat with that for a moment and said they had all been good children. I saw figures moving in the distance and told her we had to leave immediately. If we stayed, they would simply take us again. Mari wiped her face and said we were going to the surface. Surviving down there was no longer possible. She said we needed to make a promise before we left, that up there, we were going to be happy. He was certain the younger children who had gone ahead of us had wanted that for us. We pulled each other out of the pit. Gale stood at the edge and exhaled. He said that, thanks to us, he had now seen the absolute lowest point of the Undercity, a place he had genuinely never expected to find himself in. He asked, with visible exasperation, whether someone wanted to explain what exactly was going on. Mari had been colorless before. That much was not in question. Ellie stepped toward Mari and studied the color carefully. She said Mari had awakened, the same way I had, and the saturation was extraordinary. That level of vibrancy was rare even among the 3 great houses. It was genuinely beautiful. I told them there was no time for this. We were still inside a gang hideout with no certainty about when the remaining members would regroup and come back. Moving out came first. The others looked at me. Gale said something was different. Even my eyes looked changed from before. Before either of them could push further, Mari cut it off and told everyone the details could wait until they were somewhere safer. Ellie agreed there was no immediate rush. The bulk of what had been in our way had already been dealt with. Mari said she could not believe they had cleared that many on their own. Yale scoffed and said we should both be grateful. He had burned through a significant amount of color getting to us. Locked passages, continuous waves of gang members, and nothing but mass-produced spoits to work with throughout. Even so, he told us not to drop our guard. He moved out. Mari fell in slightly behind the group. One of the guards on the floor had been playing dead. He pushed himself up, furious, and decided there was no way he was letting us walk away after what had been done to him. Going back empty-handed meant losing more than just a hand. He might as well take one of us with him. He rushed at Mari. The others reacted immediately and I moved to finish it. Before I could, Mari swung her arm, a light, almost casual punch, and the man went straight into the wall. She stood there staring at her own hand. She asked whether that was what color felt like. She had barely put any force into it, and footsteps filled the passage. The peacekeeping unit arrived and went through the standard procedure, weapons down, surrender peacefully. They said they were glad to see we had made it out and thanked us for what we had done. Ellie said we had only done what the situation required. The peacekeeper acknowledged that they had heard we had pushed ahead independently, but by the time the unit arrived, there was nothing left to handle. He told us the Shade organization would not be operational for some time. They had captured enough members to ensure that, and that we should leave the cleanup entirely to them. Full responsibility was theirs from here. Mari said she was ready to go up. It felt like she had been underground for an eternity. Despite everything, she said, the others could not hold back their curiosity any longer. Ellie said I had seemed different from my usual self throughout, and asked whether something had happened. I looked down at my hand and touched my face, and remembered. I told them I was sorry for making everyone uncomfortable and put my expression back in order. I said I was fine. There had been some things sitting with me for a while, nothing serious, and they did not need to worry about it. He looked at me for a moment, then told Ellie to leave it alone. If it was something from the past, I would bring it up when I was ready. Pushing was not the right call. Ellie said he was right and that it was time to get back to the surface. Blunk was still alive, barely. He dragged himself through the Undercity on whatever was left in him, acknowledging that sheer luck had kept him breathing. His condition was genuinely terrible. He might not survive it this time. He thought about the fact that he had never gotten to see my true self at the end. Then he heard footsteps approaching. Viper appeared and greeted him with the casual ease of someone who had simply been out for a walk. She reminded him that they had an arrangement. She had gone through the effort of getting into the Undercity and her trading partner had been nowhere to be found. She had tracked him down only to discover him looking like he was already most of the way into the grave. He had something he owed her. What exactly did he plan to do about it? She studied him for a moment and acknowledged he was not dead yet, which was inconvenient in its own way. She said she had not wanted to use her ability on a human again, but there was no other option available. Even a poison, she noted, could function as medicine depending on how it was applied. When Viper returned, her sister attached herself to her immediately and demanded to know why she had been left behind. She stated plainly that next time she was coming along without any discussion. Viper reminded her sister that she had said she would be fine on her own. The swordsman noted that she had taken longer than expected and asked whether she had brought it. Viper confirmed it. The item she had described, the one that attracted creatures, mixed, or something along those lines. She had managed to secure more of it without any complications. It was time to begin. She climbed onto the giant ink creature. The swordsman followed, asking whether she was certain this would actually work on something at that scale. Creatures of that size were disasters driven solely by the Black Witch's will. He had joined the plan out of curiosity, but if they simply sent the creature into a frenzy with no real direction, what exactly would that accomplish? If things went poorly, they would be the ones at a disadvantage. Viper said she had no patience for doubt. With the Black Witch dormant, the controlling force that kept creatures in check had weakened considerably. What she had in the vial amplified their instincts for a concentrated period of time. She told him to watch. She tipped the vial onto the creature's nose. It began to thrash and move immediately, exactly as she had expected. She said they would keep moving like this. The shining city was going to be reduced to pieces. A perimeter had been established around the Undercity entrance. People gathered at a distance, speculating. The general assumption was that the gangs had gone too far again, given the number of peacekeepers on site. The peacekeeper from before approached our group and told us that all gang members and the defeated pioneers were now under secure escort. Everything from here was handled. Then a voice cut through the crowd, relieved that things were already wrapped up. Jamelia had said it was urgent, so he had come running, but it seemed there had been nothing to worry about after all. Pedestrians nearby reacted immediately upon seeing him. Red himself came directly to me and said he was not sure what exactly I had gotten myself into, but that this had genuinely caught him off guard, and that was not something that happened often. He looked at Mari and said she had changed considerably since they had lost sight of each other, and that she had awakened right after me. He noted that there were too many eyes on us here and told everyone to move to headquarters. Back at the Dawn Pioneer Corps, Jamelia said Red had done it again. Brought something remarkable back with him. Another awakened, following in my footsteps. She said she already knew who Mari was and asked Red what he thought. He said that since Lumiel Awakeners had become one of the most discussed phenomena in the city, every color that had manifested in a colorless person had belonged to someone with enough inner strength to leave a permanent mark. Mari was no different. a skilled engineer who had built my ink gauntlet from scratch. Jamelia looked at her with undisguised enthusiasm. The color was extraordinarily vivid. She asked whether Mari had any interest in joining the Dawn Corps, because they could offer essentially anything she needed. She was not considering another corps, was she? Because while she was certain everyone would want her now, the Dawn Corps would treat her 3 times better than any alternative. I looked at Mari and smiled. She said she wanted to join. There was also something specific she wanted to work. Melia said she was glad to hear that kind of conviction and told her to sign the contract right then. She slid it across the table. Before the pen touched the paper, another colorist stepped through the door. He said he had been listening from outside and that he was not in favor of accepting someone so readily. There was a test that every prospective member was required to pass before joining the Corps. They brought us all to the arena. Jamelia turned on the colorist immediately and told him he was being unreasonably stubborn. Mari wasn't awakened. He going to take personal responsibility if another Corps picked her up while he was busy running procedures? The man ignored her completely and turned to Mari, asking whether she was ready. She had already chosen her weapon, so he would explain the test and its rules. It was straightforward. She needed to defeat a test golem prepared by the Corps. The golem represented the minimum combat threshold required for membership. Anyone who could not handle that had no business setting foot in the Black Lands. He acknowledged that holding the test without prior notice was already irregular, but a minimum standard of proof was necessary for the rest of the Corps to accept her without question. He knew she was an engineer and that combat was not her background. But if the color she carried was genuine, a test like this was within her reach. She should prove that she belonged here. The golem moved the moment the test began, a direct charge, punching repeatedly without pause. Jamelia grabbed the arm of the colorist beside her and demanded to know what he was thinking, throwing someone who had never fired a spoit into something like this without any preparation. If Mari got frustrated and walked out to sign with another Corps, that was entirely on him. Mari did not hear any of it. She was working through the problem in front of her. She told herself that doubting her ability was not going to help. She had color now, and retreating was not a solution. She pushed everything she had into the spoit and drove it to its absolute limit, pouring all of it into a single strike aimed at bringing the golem down in one blow. The strike went through the ceiling. Complete silence followed. Then it erupted. The yellow-haired colorist said quietly that even if only for a moment, she had matched his emission output, and this was her first time actually using a spoit. The potential behind that was difficult to overstate. Mari herself could not bring the output back under control. Color continued spraying in every direction while she called out for help, increasingly alarmed, and punched several more holes into the ceiling before anyone could reach her. The cleanup began immediately. Mari apologized without stopping. Jamelia told her to forget about the ceiling. She said she genuinely did not know where someone like this had come from. Jamelia welcomed her into the Dawn Pioneer Corps and said that watching this many talented people come together in such a short span of time was genuinely reassuring. He was looking forward to seeing what we would all do from here. She turned to the colorist she had been arguing with and called him uncle, asking whether he had any complaints left. He said he had never had any. The test had been necessary to make the admission credible. Even for an awakened bypassing procedure entirely would have caused friction throughout the Corps. He added that the total color output she had demonstrated might be the highest of the entire current generation. He also told Jamelia to stop calling him uncle in front of others. It did nothing for her image. Jamelia told him to relax. He grabbed Mari and pulled her along, saying there were still preparations to finish and admission paperwork to complete. I had been worried when the test started without warning, but relief settled in once it was over. Red appeared beside me and asked whether the welcome celebration was finished. He confirmed we had nothing scheduled for the rest of the day. We shook our heads. He said the timing was ideal. He had been too occupied with his own responsibilities to give us any real attention, and this was the window to fix that. He told us to follow him. We went to the training ground. It was empty, which Red said made it perfect. We could work without an audience or the need to hold back. A row of training dummies had been left. They were modeled after hard shell-type creatures. Most attacks against that type barely registered. Red told us to watch carefully if we intended to survive in the Black Lands. What he was about to show us was something we had no choice but to learn. He swung his sword at the dummy. It clicked against the surface and nothing else. He said that no matter how well-crafted an ink drain or spoit was, it had a ceiling. Eventually, every attack ran into something it could not penetrate. There were also enemies that regenerated regardless of how many times they were cut down. The answer to both problems was chroma manifestation. He let his sword become saturated in color, encasing the blade completely. Gil and Ellie had seen him use it against the swordsman. That was chroma. The process involved drawing out the latent color from within oneself and layering it into both weapon and body. Once that layering was achieved, The strength it produced made everything prior look ordinary by comparison. Things that could not be cut before could be cut cleanly. We were pioneers, which meant this was a core skill we would need to develop and sharpen continuously. Every one of us needed at least one reliable trump card. The Black Lands did not give warning before demanding everything. The others reacted to how cleanly the dummy had been split. I asked whether handling chroma freely was a requirement for becoming a colorist. Red said that was the minimum by colorist standards. It was foundational, nothing more. At higher ranks, A rank and above, chroma use was commonplace. Going further, reaching S rank and clearing the special examination, was when the title of true colorist was formally recognized. He told us to draw our weapons and take our positions. He was going to teach us how to train chroma. He said it sounded more complex than it was. It was simply an extension of ourselves. We all knew the feeling that arrived just before releasing color, that moment right on the edge of activation. Normally, the color flowed outward freely. This time we were to do the opposite. Instead of letting it spill out, we had to imagine it being drawn back into the body and the weapon simultaneously. It would not come easily, but we needed to extract as much as possible and hold it there. We all attempted it. The color drained away almost immediately. At that rate, we would burn ourselves colorless. Red said he had known it would not be simple. Still, for all three of us to get even this close on the first attempt was a strong start. He told us not to let that become arrogance. Getting a head start might reflect talent, but turning that into something genuinely ours required sustained effort over time. Then I just did it. I told Red I had actually been using something like this for a while. I asked whether what I had been doing was chroma. Ellie said that explained what she had seen me do in the ruins. Red looked at me and said I was genuinely enjoyable to teach, then added that looking back, this outcome should probably not have surprised him. What I was doing right now was essentially forcing an enormous amount of raw power into a single point. I was still at the stage of pure brute force. The next level would require refinement that would give me a headache to think about. More immediately, I was using far too much. Few strikes at that consumption rate and I would be completely drained. I told him I knew the output control was still something I was actively working on. Red said he understood. Up to this point, I had been compensating for the overconsumption by absorbing more whenever I needed to refuel. He turned to Gale and Ellie and told them to keep working. Chroma needed to manifest before they stopped, and if they had no interest in falling behind me, they had better push through it. For me, he said, there was something more pressing than chroma refinement. Depending on the circumstances, I was actually in worse shape than either of them right now. He told me to put the spoit away. We were going back to fundamentals, learning to use my color with actual efficiency so that situations requiring 10 units of power did not continue costing me 100. The power looked impressive on the surface, but without proper control, it would eventually become the thing that brought me down. Red acknowledged that I had been trying to manage it in my own way, but what I was actually doing was pouring color outward with no real direction, wasting most of it in the process. Beyond that, building an entire fighting style around absorption alone was a trap. The moment I encountered someone slightly stronger who could resist the pull, I would have nothing left to work with. A sudden loss of color in the middle of a crisis, surrounded by creatures in the dark. I had survived that kind of situation so far, but counting on that margin indefinitely was not a strategy. I understood. I had been in far more danger than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. I set the spoit aside and asked what came first. Red told me to release every unit of power I had, all of it. We would start from there. I did. Red looked at what came out and said quietly that it was genuinely remarkable. He had been impressed the first time he saw it, and I had grown considerably since then. The effort of sustaining the release without any ink to draw from was already exhausting. I said as much. Red told me to hold the state exactly as it was. If it dropped even slightly, he would kill me. I told him he could not just say something like that. He said he absolutely could, and added that it was disappointing. I had come in talking about becoming a colorist, and now I could not endure this. He asked what had happened to all that determination. I told him I would maintain the state, and I was angry enough about it to mean it. By the time it was over, all three of us had burned completely through our ink deposits. I asked whether this was going to be the daily routine from now on. I had lost count of how much personal ink I had consumed. Red said we had all put in genuine work, and that for a first session, it was about what he expected. He told us to start wrapping up. We immediately began walking toward the exit. Red pointed out that he had never said we were finished. Real training was starting now. To close out the session, we were going to do live combat training. He told us to come in him like our lives depended on it. We were about to spar with Red for the first time. He told us that chroma alone was not what we were building here. Compared to a true colorist, our real combat ability was still well behind. Sparring was the only reliable way to close that gap. Now that we were as students, he intended to draw out every last trace of potential we had. He told us to get into stance and to fight as though we were facing one of the Black Hands. We were to give everything. He came and Ellie first. He pulled her ice up into a shield almost immediately. Red told her that out of the three of us, her reaction time was the highest. Her color control was exceptional. Her offense and defense were well balanced, and her fighting style carried a maturity beyond her experience. That did not mean she had no weaknesses. Then told her that when two forces met, the greater one always won. He drove a single strike through her entire ice structure and shattered it completely. He told her that her color was ice. She should be thinking about what happens when something overwhelms it entirely. The black lands were full of creatures that would do exactly that, and she needed to be ready for the worst. Gale came in from behind, going for a quick strike at an angle. Red had already read it. I moved in from the opposite side simultaneously. Red did not shift his position. He blocked every attack from both of us without releasing a single unit of color. Ellie recovered and came back in, announcing she was not finished. The three of us came at him from every angle simultaneously. Gale's frustration was building with every exchange. Not a single hit had connected between all of us combined. Then something shifted in him. A memory surfaced, someone precious to him, and whatever it unlocked pushed his output higher immediately. He came back in with noticeably greater speed and power behind it. Red stood still and readied his weapon. A single swing parried everything at once. Gale went quiet in a way that said more than any reaction could. Red moved through the counter and answered all three of us in one fluid sequence. We ended up on our knees, completely out of breath, while he stood over us and announced, "That was enough for today." He turned to Gale first and asked why he was so tense throughout. His attacks had been too easy to read. His natural instincts were not showing at all. Committing everything to a single forward lunge was the worst decision available in a real fight. Then he turned to me and said I needed to understand the difference between fighting with a spoit and fighting barehanded. He told me that what had happened in the Undercity could easily have killed me, and that I needed to learn how to read my own limits. He said my problems ran deeper than either of the other two. I sat with that for a moment and looked at Red. The man was on a different level entirely. I genuinely wondered whether I would ever reach where he stood, but I was not willing to accept the gap as permanent. I wanted to show him what I was actually capable of. I reminded him that he had told us to fight, as though we were going to kill him. I admitted I had developed a new technique recently, but had been hesitating to use it. I had not wanted things to end that way, but this was the right moment. Gold and black energy erupted from my fists simultaneously as I launched the technique forward. Red stood exactly where he was, completely unbothered in posture. Then the explosion hit. As the dust began to clear, I collapsed, colorless. I had not anticipated it would drain that much. Red watched me go down without moving. He was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at what was behind him. The crack in the ground told him everything. In that moment, he understood that I was nowhere near my actual ceiling. Gale and Ellie stood in the same stunned silence, both of them wondering whether they had ever seen me that strong, and quietly asking themselves whether blending black with another color meant I might eventually be able to command every color the way Lord Luminous did. Red laughed. He acknowledged that he was going to have to put in more serious work himself if he did not want to look embarrassed standing next to us. He picked me up, put me over his shoulder, and told Gale and Ellie to rest and recover. He told them not to let what they had just seen shake their confidence in themselves. He knew watching me might make it difficult to believe their own abilities meant anything, but at that moment, both of them were already stronger than the average pioneer. They needed to keep building on it. He said he did not even want to think about how Shamilia was going to react when she saw the training ground. At the Dawn Pioneer Command Center, Shamilia felt the ground shake beneath her feet and looked up from what she was doing. On the other end, Mari's voice came through, surprised, asking whether she could keep the equipment and clothes she'd been given. Shamilia told her not to give it a second thought. They were an S-rank corps. Something like that was pocket change. Mari was told the materials were extremely durable and to consider everything a welcome gift. He thanked Shamilia warmly and told her to take care of herself. Someone approached the door quickly and stepped inside, telling Shamilia there was a problem. He told her to look up at the sky. Mari and Shamilia exchanged a confused look before Shamilia stepped outside. Black rain was falling. She looked up and stretched out her hand, catching it. The moment she understood what it was, the color drained from her face. A black wave was moving toward the city, and riding on top of the massive creature behind it were the Black Hands. Preparation began immediately. The creature's scale was unlike anything recent memory held. People scrambled, some evacuating on the spot, others taking defensive positions. The realization spread quickly that this was a wave, arriving without any prior warning or escalation. Nothing had so much as stirred since the fourth wave, and the size of what was approaching defied reason. The old accounts of the ancient civilization's destruction suddenly felt less like history and more like a warning. A single entity of that scale was capable of leveling a city. Soldiers positioned their cannons and began firing the moment a clear shot presented itself, their commander ordering them to hold until they had proper targeting before releasing. Gale told me to stop staring out the window and get ready. Red arrived shortly after and told us to grab our equipment. He said judging by how fast the situation was developing, we would be needed on the front line soon. He told us to advance immediately. I heard the siren and asked whether that was the one that activated when creatures breached the city's perimeter. Ellie confirmed it. She also noticed the black ash drifting down and went quiet. Something about it pulled her back. She had seen that before. Citywide announcement followed, ordering all pioneers to return to their respective corps immediately. Evacuation began across every district, people moving in every direction they could. Ellie and I watched from an elevated position as the crowds below emptied the streets. On the outskirts, destruction was already spreading, pushing people away from their initial routes. The Black Hands had appeared at the perimeter. Then a loud announcement cut through the noise of the evacuation. Gale asked why someone was announcing themselves in the middle of this. I told him those were Blaze and Nickel from the Radiance Pioneer Corps. They had been building a reputation steadily and were well-known rivals operating out of the eastern region. In a state of emergency like this, running into every active corps in the city was inevitable. Another voice declared that if the situation continued at its current pace, creatures would reach civilians before the evacuation could be completed. Until every citizen was clear of the danger zone, the pioneers would hold the advancing wave back and keep the path open. We arrived and took our positions. One of the Radiance Corps announced loudly that now that they were on the field, not a single civilian would be touched. The soldiers were already being overwhelmed. I stepped forward and cut through the nearest wave, and the others followed immediately behind me as we pushed into the advancing line. The other Pioneer Corps had already established their defensive formations, while the evacuation continued behind us. Several creatures broke away and charged toward the civilians. They were eliminated in seconds by concentrated fire, but the soldiers called out that they needed to buy more time and kept pressing forward as the volume of monsters surging and increased dramatically. Then the Colorists arrived, their colors burning visibly as they moved into position. Jamelia kept her address brief. She was temporarily assuming command over all Pioneer Corps. The first confirmed development was a significant number of Black Hand groups appearing in the direction of the forward base. Hearing that brought the swordsman immediately to mind. Someone exhaled and said it had nearly become a catastrophe, then apologized for the delay. Another red colorist stepped forward, told us we had done well holding the line, thanked us for buying the time, and ordered us to fall back and hold our positions. A creature launched an attack from the advancing mass. A red blast tore one of its limbs completely off mid-strike. It screamed and recoiled. Gale and I both went still watching it. Then the giant emerged fully, enormous, sending a sweeping strike across the ground that shook everything around us. Someone ordered us to brace for impact. The vanguard surged forward to absorb the blow and hold the line. We drove straight into the incoming creature wave. The scale of it, every corps, every pioneer, every soldier moving together was unlike anything I had been part of before. From above, the swordsman spotted me. He watched from his position on top of the massive creature, identifying me as the key to opening the black curtain. He told himself he would not let me slip away this time. Jamelia, from her command position, told Red that someone would likely be targeting me. He needed to keep watch. On top of the giant creature, the swordsman and the twins observed the battle below. One of the twins remarked that the vials had proven far more effective than she had anticipated. Moving this many creatures with only a few dozen of them was remarkable. She laughed and said she was starting to feel like the Black Witch herself. She noted that future plans were going to be very entertaining. Jamelia issued the next order. She was leaving the city's defense to us. We would have spread into formation, encircle the creature mass from both flanks, sweep through them, then consolidate with the main defense force and concentrate everything on the giant creature. She told us to hold the line until the Black Hands had been repelled. The other red colorist told the field commander they would move to intercept the Black Hands directly. I looked toward the cannon line and felt relief. Keeping Mari away from close quarters combat in her first real engagement was critical. Coming face to face with the Black Hands in open combat would be genuinely dangerous for anyone in that position. The announcement went out for all colorists to move.